recorded in the vaults beneath the Ashen Library, by the hand of Archmagus Caelthar Ignivar, in the final year of the Cinder Cycle. Know this, Seeker, what follows is no fable, nor courtly fancy, nor the sanitized histories whispered by kings. These are the true chronicles of Seraphyne Vaelor, she who would be named the Ash Queen. In the 26th regnal year of King Cassian I, a child was born beneath a storm without thunder. In the 12th year of King Alaric's rule, that child would stand at his side as arcane champion of the Three Crowns. And for 41 years thereafter, she ruled not by lineage, nor by law, but by inevitability. The Codex of Cinders warned us of her long before she drew breath. It spoke of a daughter of ashes, of a crown forged from ruin, and of a choice that would decide the fate of kingdoms. I was there when she was found. I was there when she was taken. And I lived long enough to witness the age that followed, the age shaped by her fire and by our fear. So let the scribes scratch their lies upon gilded parchment. Let kings seal their pretty histories with waxen heraldry. I give you the truth, as only one who survived it can. We were blind then, all of us. We saw a girl with strange eyes and wild talent, and believed the story would end in obedience. We were wrong. Her story begins long before the Codex, in a home of hunger, grief, and fire.
Long before her name was spoken in whispers or carved into forbidden tomes, Seraphyne Vaelor was known as one of the most brilliant sorceresses of her age. She was not born of nobility, nor chosen by prophecy. She earned her power, the Cinder Codex, the book that burns without flame. Origins of the Cinder Codex. Long before the rise of empires, before kings ruled by crown or blade, there existed a conclave of primordial arcanists known as the Pyrrhic Circle. They believed that fire was not merely an element, but the first truth of creation. They taught that all things are born through fire, stars, souls, even gods. When the Circle foresaw the collapse of their age, they sought to preserve their knowledge not in stone or spell, but in something alive. Thus, they bound their collective will, blood, and souls into a single artifact, the Cinder Codex. It was not written in ink, but in living sigils, etched with molten runes that shift and rewrite themselves. The Codex does not reveal knowledge. It awakens it. It does not teach. It chooses. Many who touched it burned to ash within moments. Others were driven mad, their minds reduced to screaming embers. Only those whose souls resonated with the Codex's hunger were permitted to hear its whispers. The Cinder Codex, its true history. The first being to ever touch the Cinder Codex was not a king, nor a mage of any order, but a primordial arcanist known only as Aelthar the Flamebound. He lived in the age before crowns, when magic was raw and unshaped. Aelthar did not find the Codex. It formed around him. He was the first mortal to glimpse the deeper structure of magic itself. And in his attempt to understand it, his soul became the anchor that allowed the Codex to exist. His body was consumed. His mind fractured across the weave of magic. His essence became bound to the Codex itself. He did not die. He became the first whisper inside the book. The Codex has never been empty since. Over the centuries, others found the Codex. Each believed they were chosen. Each was wrong, recorded in lost histories. The Ember Sage of Nal burned to ash within moments, his screams said to still echo when the Codex is opened. The Scarlet Scholar survived for 3 days, driven mad by visions of past and future, tearing out her own eyes. The twin Magi of Velthar attempted to share the burden. Both were consumed when the Codex rejected division. The silent monk endured for 7 years before vanishing, leaving only a trail of scorched footsteps into the sea. Each failed because they tried to control the codex. None were accepted. The codex lay dormant for nearly 6 centuries before Seraphyne found it. During that time, it rejected every seeker. It grew quieter, and its whispers faded into legend. Most scholars believed it was a myth, but the truth was simpler. It was waiting. Not for power, not for knowledge, but for compatibility. Seraphyne did not seek the codex. She did not hunger for forbidden power. She did not believe she was worthy. That was precisely why she was chosen. Where others sought to dominate the flame, she listened. Where others demanded answers, she asked questions. Where others would have burned, she endured. The codex did not awaken to her. It awakened because of her. The codex's long silence was not dormancy. It was patience. It was waiting for a soul strong enough to survive transformation without losing itself. A vessel not defined by ambition or fear. A being capable of becoming more without being consumed. Seraphyne was not the first to touch the Cinder Codex. She was the first it accepted. The Cinder Codex was never meant to serve mortals. Its purpose is threefold. 1. To remember. It contains the true history of the world before the gods imposed order, an age when magic was wild and destiny mutable. 2. To choose a vessel. The Codex seeks one capable of wielding its power without being consumed. Not a ruler, but a conduit. One whose ambition is matched by suffering. 3. To herald the Ashen Age. When the Codex awakens fully, it seeks to bring about a cleansing conflagration, a rebirth through ruin. Not destruction for its own sake, but the ending of stagnation, the prophecy of cinders. Hidden deep within its shifting pages lies a prophecy written in a dead tongue that no mortal had ever spoken aloud until now. From flame unbound shall she rise, born not of crown but of betrayal. Betrayed by crown, anointed by ash, she shall walk the path unchosen. When the ashen star falls and the throne burns hollow, the daughter of cinders shall stand between ruin and rebirth. Queen or cataclysm, the world shall burn by her hand, or be reborn within its fire. When Seraphyne Vaelor uncovered the Codex in the forgotten depths of the temple, it recognized her. Not as a servant, not as a wielder, but as the prophesied bearer. The book did not open to her touch. It opened to her soul. Where others saw indecipherable runes, she saw memories. Where others heard madness, she heard truth. The Codex whispered not commands, but possibilities, feeding her power while reshaping her destiny. It was not corruption. It was recognition. The Codex does not give freely. Each secret learned etches itself into the bearer's essence. Each spell leaves a mark unseen by mortal eyes. Over time, the bearer becomes something more and something less than human. It is said that when the final page is revealed, the reader must choose, seal the Codex forever, ending its cycle and sacrificing themselves to preserve the world, or ascend, becoming the living embodiment of its will, the Ash Sovereign.
Chapter 1. Before the Flame. The winter of ash and salt, before she was the Ash Queen, before prophecy and betrayal and fire. Seraphyne Vaelor was born into a world that scarcely noticed her. Her story began not in a palace or tower, but in a salt-stained fishing village called Old Varenshold, where the sea devoured more lives than wars ever did, and where the smell of brine and dead fish clung to every surface like a second skin. Old Varenshold was a place where fathers were lost to storms or conscription, and where mothers learned to stretch copper coins into meals through ingenuity and desperation. It sat on the northern coast of the Valamir kingdom, a kingdom that claimed dominion over seas it barely controlled, and men it hardly paid. In the year before her birth, King Cassian I began what he would later name the Red Standard Campaign, a war to unify the fractured North. though anyone beneath a lord's title knew it was merely another attempt to seize taxes from mountain clans who refused to kneel. To the nobles, it was a brief and glorious campaign. To the poor, it was a butcher's tally. Among those conscripted was Seraphyne Vaelor, a dockhand born of the same sea stink and poverty as everyone in Old Varenshold. He had never held a sword before the day a royal magistrate jammed parchment into his hands and told him he fought for the glory of the crown. He kissed his wife, Lisa Vaelor, beneath the gray dawn sky, promising he'd be home before winter. Winter came. Darek did not. The widow of the docks. Lisa was not remarkable in lineage or talent. She was a gutter of fish at the docks, earning a handful of tarnished coins each day by slicing open cod until her hands cracked from brine and cold. She was small, wiry, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, the sort of woman others mistook for hard-hearted simply because she did not have time to cry. When word of her husband's death arrived, it came not by messenger, but by neighbor, whispered while gutting fish. The red standard broke at Oak Hollow. Your Derek was with them. No body returned. No priest offered rites. No compensation arrived. The crown had already moved on. Lisa did not scream or curse. She went back to work. Her belly was already swelling with the child that would never know its father. And grief, she had learned, did not keep the lanterns burning or the stomach full. By the time the leaves fell and the first storms rolled in from the north, she had saved enough to buy a small iron stove, the only luxury in their one-room shack. It was there, on a night when the wind howled like wolves and the sea battered the shore, that her daughter was born. The storm-born child. There was no midwife. Old Varenshold did not have midwives, only mothers who survived births and mothers who did not. Lisa labored alone, clutching the edge of the straw mattress with white knuckles, biting down on a strip of leather to keep from screaming and waking neighbors who had their own problems. Rein hammered the thin roof. The iron stove glowed red, fighting back a cold that seemed determined to claw its way beneath the door. The child slipped into the world just as a thunderless lightning strike flashed above the cottage, a brilliant white light that illuminated every crack and leak in the shingled roof for the briefest instant. The baby did not cry. She breathed in once, slow and steady, and opened her eyes. Lisa froze. Infants were supposed to be squalling red bundles, eyes squeezed shut, fists flailing. But this child, her child, stared back with eyes the color of fresh ash, not gray like cloud or steel, but the pale silver of embers dying in a hearth. And then the strangest thing, the fire in the stove bent toward the newborn, not wildly, but almost reverently, as if acknowledging her arrival. The air grew warm despite the storm. Embers sparked upward from the stove and did not die. They drifted through the air, as if suspended on invisible currents, swirling around the newborn in a slow, mesmerizing dance. Lisa sat utterly still, blessing or curse. In Old Varenshold, the line was thinner than paper. When the final ember winked out, Lisa wrapped the baby in a threadbare blanket and whispered, Seraphyne. It was a name she had heard only once, spoken by a traveling priest who preached of angels that burned with divine fire. The word had stayed with her, tucked away like a pressed flower between pages. Now it felt inevitable. She kissed her daughter's forehead, feeling heat beneath the skin, not feverish, but alive, like a coal beneath ash. My little burning star, a memory of fire. Seraphyne grew strange, not strange of mind. She was quiet, observant, fiercely intelligent, but strange in ways that made mothers watch their children around her, and fathers make the warding sign when she walked past. At age 3, she placed her hand on a kettle boiling over the stove and did not cry. At age 5, she sat outside during the first snowfall and melted the flakes on contact. Lisa found her in a circle of steaming slush, humming softly. At age 6, a neighbor boy shoved her into the dirt. Sparks crackled from her hands. The boy yelped and ran crying. claiming she had burned without fire. Lysa said nothing. Better rumors than torches. Better whispers than trials. For magic in the kingdom of Valamir belonged to the orders and the nobility, and anything outside their rules was called witchcraft. Lysa hid the signs as best she could, but power is not something that stays hidden when it wants to be seen. When the order came, when Seraphyne was 11, the order sent surveyors, robed men with soul stones and sensor gloves, traveling to test for aptitude. In truth, they were harvesting talent. Few in old Varenshold feared them. There had not been a gifted child in 2 generations. Seraphyne stood barefoot in line, hair unbraided, eyes narrowed at the glowing testing crystal each child was forced to hold. Most touched it, and nothing happened. Some caused it to flicker faintly. When Seraphine's turn came, the examiner placed the crystal in her small hand. It shattered, not violently, but in a silent, surgical fracturing, splitting clean down the center, as if refusing to contain what it found. Embers drifted upward from the broken core. Within hours, a raven was dispatched. Within days, the order returned, this time with a high seer. They inspected the cottage, the girl, the air itself. The elder spoke. Your daughter carries fire in her soul. She must be trained, for her safety and for ours. Lysa felt something break inside her, quietly like a rope snapping in a well. The seer knelt to the girl and asked, Do you feel it? Seraphyne nodded. Does it hurt? A pause. Only when I try to stop it. And Lysa knew she had already lost. The last morning. They returned at dawn. Lysa stayed awake through the night, holding her daughter close, whispering every story she knew. When the knock came, Seraphyne looked up and asked, Do I have to go? Only because you are meant for something greater, Lysa replied. Will I see you again? Yes, she lied. In dreams and stories, in every fire you kindle. Seraphyne nodded once, accepting the lie as mercy. She walked barefoot into the cold dawn. Frost melted beneath her feet. By midday, the carriage vanished over the ridge road. By nightfall, the village returned to routine. By winter's end, no one spoke her name, except Lysa. Every night she whispered it into the stove's fire, Seraphyne, and each time the flames leaned toward her, as if listening.
So you returned, brave, or just curious, I won't judge. Chapter 2 is where the Order tried to shape me, silence me, tame me. They failed. I did not bend. Remember that as you read what they did next.
Year 1, The Flight of the Cage, age 12. The Pyrrhic Circle. Sanctum was unlike anything Seraphyne had ever seen. Towering obsidian pillars, windows of stained glass depicting ancient battles, and halls alive with floating braziers that burned without fuel. To scholars, it was a marvel. To Seraphyne, it was a prison. For the first month, she did not speak. For the second, she planned escape. The Order called them acolyte examinations, testing each child's magical aptitude, discipline, and obedience. Seraphyne endured them all with the same silent defiance. When instructors placed spells at her fingertips, she refused to cast. When asked to read runic structures, she stared past the page. She saved her strength for the night. The sanctum walls were enchanted to keep children in. But old Varenshold had taught her how to climb fishnets slick with brine and ice. Compared to that, smooth carved stone was almost kind. Her first escape nearly succeeded. Under the cover of moonlight, she slipped through the unused servant's gate and sprinted barefoot through the frost-hardened fields until the torches of the sanctum were distant sparks behind her. She made it 20 miles before dawn. By midday, mage hunters caught her at the river crossing, silent and efficient as wolves. They wrapped her in wards and carried her back without a word. The Order did not punish her physically. That was forbidden. But isolation awaited, a chamber of cold stone with no fire, no books, no voice but her thoughts. She tried again 2 weeks later, and again 3 months after that. In one bitter spring storm, she slipped her ward brace and fled through sleet and mud, barefoot, shivering, desperate. The mage hunters found her collapsed in a ditch, fevered and shaking. Every escape ended the same way: returned, warded, observed. The instructors recorded her attempts clinically. Strong survival instincts, untrained magical response, poor compliance with order doctrine. But they missed the truth entirely. She wasn't running from magic. She was running to her mother. Each time they dragged her back, she whispered through chattering teeth, "I promised." She said I'd see her. Promises meant something in old Varenshold. The order had no concept of poverty's loyalty or grief's stubbornness. Year 2. The king's death. Age 13. News traveled slowly to the sanctum, delayed by wards and censors. But when word finally arrived that King Cassian I was dead, the sanctum bells tolled thrice, the ritual signal for royal passage. Students whispered, instructors prayed. The order performed rites acknowledging the passing of the realm's shepherd. Most acolytes mourned a distant figure of authority. Seraphyne did not. She sat in the library scriptorium, hands folded, eyes locked on the flickering braziers. A warmth coiled behind her ribs, not joy, but something sharper, something like vindication. No one in the sanctum understood. To them, Cassian was a sacred monarch, ruler by divine right, patron of the orders. To Seraphyne, Cassian was the man who took her father. His death did not heal anything, but it ended something. The cycle of waiting for a man who would never return from war. In that moment, she made her first internal vow. No king will ever decide my life again. She never voiced it, but it shaped everything that followed. Though history rarely lingers on the advisors of kings, Kelthar Ignivar was no mere ornament of Cassian's throne. He arrived at court in his 30s, sharp-minded, flame-touched, and already notorious within the order for his theories on intent magic and the spiritual inheritance of spellcraft. Where the other advisors offered Cassian charts, treaties, and ledgers, Kelthar offered prediction. Which border skirmishes would become wars, which nobles would defect before they did, which emerging mages were worth nurturing, and which were worth removing. Cassian valued the man, but not the ideas. The king wanted certainty, not prophecy, stability, not evolution. And so Kelthar remained at court for 7 years, a gilded mind trapped in political stagnation, his real work reduced to polite warnings, ignored by men who feared anything older than their own dynasties. When King Cassian fell to illness and war exhaustion, Kelthar was not permitted to guide succession, nor to speak at the funerary rites. His dismissal was wrapped in courtesies. The realm has no further need of your counsel, and followed by a signed edict returning him to the order. Kelthar obeyed, but he did not forget. Return to the sanctum, returning to the order, after years in the palace, was not triumph, it was exile. The conclave welcomed him with ceremony, but the subtext was clear. You have returned diminished, and we will study the change. He resumed his duties as educator and archivist, combing through century-old treatises, annotating grimoires, and conducting talent evaluations. It was during these evaluations that he first saw her. Seraphyne was 13, thin, frostbitten from escape attempts, and fierce in a way that could not be taught. She had just failed, deliberately he suspected, a runic transcription exam, and sat alone in the scriptorium, glaring at a candle that refused to go out. Kelthar paused in the doorway, watching the flame. The candle bent toward her, no wind, no draft, no apparent spell, only sympathy. Kelthar asked quietly, "Why do you not blow it out?" Seraphyne did not look up. "It isn't ready." He said nothing, because for the first time in years he had no argument. He did not become her teacher immediately. Seraphyne was still under the care of lesser instructors, all of whom reported her as difficult, unteachable, or in open rebellion. Kelthar disagreed. He recognized pattern where others saw defiance. He recognized potential where others saw danger. He recognized hunger where others saw fear. And though he did not yet know it, She recognized him as well, not as master, but as the first adult in the sanctum who did not flinch from wildfire. Years 4 to 6, the reluctant flame, ages 14 to 19. The order attempted to shape her as they did all prodigies: runes before dawn, meditation before breakfast, coursework before midday, spellwork in the afternoon, discipline before rest. Most acolytes bent beneath the structure. Seraphyne did not break, but she did not bend either. She learned slowly, not because she lacked talent, but because she refused indoctrination. When instructors invoked loyalty to crown, she stayed silent. When tutors demanded reverence for the order, she stared them down. Her resistance became a kind of legend among the acolytes. "The girl who fails on purpose," they whispered. "The one who runs," others answered. "The one who won't kneel," some dared to say. But beneath the defiance, a different truth emerged. She learned in her own way. She studied fire not as spellwork, but as behavior. How it clings, how it breathes, how it remembers what it touched. She observed magic in cause and effect, not incantation. While others chanted formulae, she watched candles lean toward her when she entered a room. One instructor once forced her to hold a lit coal to demonstrate heat discipline. The coal cooled in her hand. The instructor recorded, "Subject shows abnormal thermal resistance and heat inversion, possible latent primordial affinity." She learned in silence, but she learned deeply. Punishments that were not the order's punishments were psychological. Deprivation, silence, reflection. Seraphyne endured these without tears or apology, but they made mistakes. They placed her in a cell with no windows, believing isolation would break her. They forgot there was a furnace in the next room. That night, the furnace flared beyond safety limits, forcing instructors to intervene as the metal casing glowed white-hot. Seraphyne slept peacefully through the chaos. Hair haloed on the stone like strands of smoldering coal. The instructors did not speak of it, but wards were adjusted afterward. A slower kind of learning. By age 16, she had stopped trying to escape, not because the mage hunters had broken her, but because she understood the distance. Old Varen's hold was days away on foot, across mountains, rivers, and roads guarded by soldiers. And her mother, she reasoned, may have moved or remarried or died. Reality had replaced hope, not by force, but by erosion. She threw herself into study then, not the study they demanded, but the study she needed. Fire's hunger, Ash's memory, emotions linked to magic, the cost of power. Her instructors noted a strange behavior. Seraphyne learned slowly until she learned something real, and then her progress leapt in terrifying bounds. By age 18, she was surpassing older acolytes in practical spellcraft. Not because she mastered the spells, but because she stopped using the spells entirely. When asked to produce a controlled flame, she did not recite incantations. She simply thought and flame obeyed. When asked to extinguish a blaze, she did not invoke water magic. She simply commanded the fire to rest. An instructor once asked, "How did you do that?" Seraphyne only shrugged. It wanted to stop. They wrote in their reports, "Subject demonstrates unmediated magical response. Possible conduit-type mage. Dangerous." They were wrong on one point. Seraphyne was not a conduit. She was an axis. Magic did not pass through her. Magic pivoted around her. Age 19. The breaking of the glass. Something happened that changed everything. During a lecture on fire containment theory, a senior mage demonstrated a containment sphere, a glass orb designed to trap flame for study. Normal acolytes practiced by lighting sparks inside the sphere. Seraphyne did nothing. The instructor scolded her. "If you refuse to participate, you will fail the evaluation." Seraphyne raised her hand almost lazily, and a single ember appeared inside the orb. The instructor smirked, until the ember grew. Not brighter, deeper. The flame inside the orb did not expand. It condensed, growing denser, darker, hotter. The glass began to glow orange, then red, then white. The instructor cried out, "Stop! Stop at once!" Seraphyne blinked, confused. She had not tried to increase the heat. She had simply summoned a flame. The orb cracked, then shattered. Not with force, but with sound. A clear, bell-like note that resonated through the chamber and up the sanctum's halls. The flame vanished without a trace. No scorch marks, no smoke, no residue. The only evidence was the molten edge of the broken glass. The head instructor whispered, "Fire does not behave that way." But Seraphyne was not looking at the orb. She was staring at her hands, not in fear, but in recognition. Something had changed, and soon everything else would follow. The day that changed everything, she was sent to the Order's library, deep inside the ruins of an old temple, to retrieve a tome. A comprehensive accounting of arcane flux variants in low-yield ley. Conduits, revised 3rd edition, commonly known among acolytes as the Grey Ledger. While searching for the Grey Ledger, and deep beneath the forgotten temple, unseen and unheard, the codex pulsed, its pages whispering her name again and again. Seraphyne, Seraphyne, Seraphyne. Behind her, 20 paces back, walked Archmagus Kael'thar Ignivar. His steps made no sound. Wards softened them as automatically as breathing. He had not told her he was following. He had not been ordered to. But over 2 decades of scholarship had shaped certain instincts. When prophecy stirs, one watches. They descended into a circular vault whose ceiling had long ago collapsed, leaving a jagged aperture through which thin shafts of daylight filtered down like spears. Beneath that fractured crown of stone sat an obsidian pedestal. Upon it, the codex. The chamber had grown unnaturally still. No wind, no echo. Even the torchlight seemed to hold its breath. Seraphyne stood alone before the obsidian plinth where the codex rested. Without warning, the runes upon its cover began to shift, not glow, move, like living embers crawling beneath blackened skin. Then, a whisper, not from her mind, from the air itself. "Child of cinder." Seraphyne froze. The voice did not echo. It resonated, inside bone, inside marrow. The air grew heavy, thick with heat, yet no flame burned. She stepped back. "I didn't open you," she said, her voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. The book answered anyway. "You did not need to. You were already open." The sigils flared. The tome cracked open of its own accord, pages flipping as if caught in an unseen gale. Ancient script bled into new forms, runes rearranging themselves, aligning not with language, but with her. A pressure seized her chest. Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. "You're not supposed to." I have waited centuries for a mind that could hear me. A surge of heat flooded her veins. Not pain, but recognition. Memories not her own flooded her senses. Burning cities, screaming skies, a crown of ash upon a shattered throne, the fall of empires, the silence after. She staggered back, clutching the stone altar. "What are you?" she demanded. The codex answered not with words, but with understanding. A single truth burned itself into her mind. Power is not taken. It is awakened. The air screamed. Runes ignited across the chamber walls. The floor split with glowing seams of molten light. Instinctively, Seraphyne raised her hand, and the fire answered. A sphere of molten flame bloomed in her palm, alive and thrumming, coiling around her fingers like a living thing. It did not burn her. It recognized her. She gasped, not in pain, but in awe. This is impossible." The codex voice softened, almost tender. "No, my child, this is inevitable." She felt it then, the tether snapping into place. A conduit forming between her soul and something vast, ancient, patient. The codex did not explode with power. It did not announce itself. It did not need to. Across the chamber, Kael'thar exhaled. Slow, controlled, inevitable. His eyes glinted beneath his hood. "Of course it is you," he whispered. And then something rarer than prophecy happened. The codex yielded, its spine cracked open, pages fanning out as if bowing. Symbols rearranged themselves midair, forming patterns only she could interpret. Her eyes darted over them, reading without understanding how she read, breathing without knowing how to breathe. The fire dimmed. The codex closed. Her knees buckled. Kael'thar moved faster than the flames had, catching her by the shoulders before she struck the stone. She blinked up at him, dazed, lantern flickering on the floor beside them. "You followed me?" she whispered, voice raw. Kael'thar did not deny it. "I follow knowledge, worm," he replied. "Sometimes it leads me to ruins, sometimes to students." His gaze flicked to the codex, now inert and silent. "Do not touch it again," he murmured, voice low. "Not until you understand what it asks." When Seraphyne first touched it, nothing outward changed at all. That was the lie. Her hands were steady, her breath normal, her pulse unremarkable. And yet, the world felt closer. She realized with a quiet shock that she was no longer learning magic. She was recognizing it. What the Codex truly does. The Cinder Codex does not give power. It rewrites the relationship between bearer and magic. Before the Codex, Seraphyne reached for magic cautiously, shaping it with discipline and restraint. After the Codex, magic recognized her. It leaned toward her emotions, anger, fear, certainty, not to amplify them, but to move through them. Her thoughts became conduits. Her will became a shape. She did not feel stronger. She felt aligned, and that terrified her. They returned to the sanctum under a sky turning violet. Snow collected in Seraphine's hair. She did not seem to notice. Kael'thar walked 3 paces behind, not as a warden, not as a captor, as a shield. He did not know when that shift had happened, but he knew why. If the Conclave learned the Codex had awakened, they would bind her. If the Crown learned, they would weaponize her. And if either faction succeeded, the world would burn wrong. So he altered the record. When they arrived at the sanctum gates, an instructor asked if the Grey Ledger had been retrieved. Kael'thar answered evenly, "Yes." "And nothing unusual below?" A heartbeat, a lie. "Nothing at all." Seraphyne glanced sideways at him, studying his face for tremor or strain. There was none, but she understood what it meant. He was choosing her over the Conclave. The crackle of distant firelight from the Order's towers felt louder. The warmth of the sun pressed against her skin like a living thing. Even the ash beneath her boots seemed to remember heat long after it should have cooled. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "You will say nothing of this to the others. Not the Conclave, not the Crown, especially not the King." Seraphyne nodded, though unease curled in her chest. "What happens now?" Kael'thar hesitated, then gave the faintest of smiles. "Now, my child," he said, "your true education begins."
My story is far from over. The Codex has only begun to open, and the flames remember all who bear witness. Return for the next chapter. If you would see what the fire reveals next. Taken from her home, bound by the Order, Seraphyne endured years of discipline and confinement until her power began to answer her, not them.
Chapter 3. The First Breaking of the Veil. The training hall rang with the sharp crack of spellfire and shouted incantations. Rows of acolytes stood in a wide stone circle, each waiting their turn beneath the watchful eyes of the Order's masters. This was not a lesson. It was a proving. The trial of controlled will. A test meant to weed out those who could not master restraint. Seraphyne stood at the edge of the arena, jaw tight, hands trembling at her sides. She had already lost once. Her opponent, a senior acolyte named Corin, had disarmed her with practiced ease. The murmurs of the watching students still echoed in her ears. Talented but unstable. Too emotional. Promising but dangerous. She hated that word. The master raised his staff. "Second bout. Begin." Seraphyne inhaled slowly. She centered herself just as she'd been taught. Control, precision, restraint. Her hands open, breathing measured. She had misjudged before, unfocused and angry with herself. Anger was dangerous. She reached inward as she had 100 times before. She intended something simple. Mage Hand, a harmless cantrip, a spectral force meant to push, distract, disarm. She did not speak the incantation. She did not finish forming the sigil. She felt the shape of the spell and released it. The air snapped, not outward, inward. The force struck her opponent like a physical blow, open-palmed and precise, carrying weight far beyond any cantrip ever should. Bone cracked, flesh folded. The acolyte flew backward, hit the stone wall, and collapsed in a spray of blood and breathless sound. Silence fell. Seraphyne stared at her own hand. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't burning. It was perfectly still. The power had already passed, but something was wrong. The air tightened. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She felt the familiar heat stir in her chest. Stronger than before. Aching to be released. She tried to pull back and failed. The hall went silent. Dust drifted slowly through the air. The boy did not rise. A healer rushed forward shouting. Another instructor ran to his side. Blood trickled from his mouth. His ribs were shattered. His nose crushed. His breath came in wet, broken gas. He lived, barely. Seraphyne stood frozen, her hands still outstretched, fingers trembling. The warmth in her chest had turned to ice. I didn't mean... The instructors stared at her, not with anger, but with something far worse. Fear. That spell should not have carried that much force, but she barely heard them, because that was when the Codex spoke again. Not aloud, not even in words. It showed her the truth. She had not cast Mage Hand. She had cast Cinder Pulse, a shaping of kinetic force through thermal memory. A spell that treated flesh as ash waiting to be formed. A spell not written anywhere. A spell she should not have known. Her vision dimmed at the edges, not from fainting, but from the effort of not casting again. For the first time, a physical change manifested. Her pupils constricted sharply, ringed with faint ember red light that faded almost instantly when she clenched her jaw and forced herself still. Only Kael'thar saw it. Only Kael'thar understood. No one answered, because they all felt it. The magic had not obeyed her. It had answered her. From that moment on, the whispers began. The Order stopped calling her gifted. They called her dangerous, and deep within her, something stirred. Pleased. Ward speakers bound her in suppression sigils and led her away. She did not resist. Resistance would have been catastrophic. That night, sleep refused to come. Seraphyne lay awake in her narrow chamber, the stone walls pressing in, the echoes of the impact still ringing in her ears. The crack of bone, the gasps, the horrified silence of the watching acolytes. She hadn't meant to hurt him. She had only reached, and something had answered. The air in her chamber grew warm, not uncomfortable, intent. The candles guttered, their flames bending toward her as though drawn by breath. Then she felt it, a presence, not hostile, not welcoming, aware. The floor trembled faintly as a seam in the far wall began to glow. Runes, ancient, half erased, flickered to life one by one. The stone groaned, shifting, revealing a narrow recess that should not have existed. Within it rested a lectern of blackened stone, and upon it, the Cinder Codex. "You should not be here," the Codex answered, not with words, with recognition. A heat bloomed in her chest, steady and warm, like a long-held breath finally released. The runes upon the book pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She reached out. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, the world fell silent. Time did not stop, but it bent. Knowledge flooded her mind in fragments, fire shaping itself, power yielding to will, the truth of magic not as spell or incantation, but as intent made manifest. She staggered back, gasping. The Codex closed itself with a sound like distant thunder. At last! 3 days later, the Order convened a conclave. Kael'thar knew that King Alaric was arriving today. He had to go meet him, to try to convince King Alaric to take Seraphyne with him. Kael'thar requested private audience. No one refused a scholar who had once advised Cassian the First through war. He faced Alaric without bowing. That alone unsettled the young king. "You wish Seraphyne Vaelor sent to my court," Alaric said, not bothering to hide curiosity. "Why?" Kael'thar studied him, the man who had inherited a battered throne from a father who bled the realm dry. "Because she is too valuable to be caged," Kael'thar replied, "and too dangerous to be ignored." Alaric leaned forward. Dangerous how? Kael'thar did not mention the codex, not the flames, not the voice calling her child. He said only, she will be a weapon to someone. Better she serve a crown than an institution. Alaric sat back slowly, weighing the idea. A weapon, a prodigy, a power his father had never possessed. It was a seductive calculus. Kael'thar added, softly, deliberately, and she listens when spoken to. For now, it was the final hook. Kings cannot resist things that are powerful and temporary. Alaric nodded. Seraphyne stood upon the sigil at the center of the hall. Her wrists were unbound, but 4 ward speakers ringed the perimeter. A silver-robed scribe recorded every breath. High Magister Vorin addressed her without ceremony. Acolyte Seraphyne Vaelor. You stand under citation for reckless invocation. Corin Vallis remains incapacitated. Do you contest these facts? Seraphyne met his gaze. I do not. The quill scratched rapidly. High Seer Thalos leaned forward. Explain what you attempted. Mage Hand. A standard cantrip for disarmament. Shock rippled through the chamber. The medic was summoned. He spoke plainly. No burn, no sigil residue, no spell signature. That was what terrified them. Magic always leaves fingerprints. Seraphine's left nothing. Thalos questioned further. Did you speak the incantation? No. Did you form the sigils? No. Did you channel will into a spell structure at all? Seraphyne hesitated. I only thought of movement. The chamber drowned in silence. Unstructured invocation, Thalos breathed. Vorin snapped that such things were impossible. The medic quietly corrected him. They are possible. They simply end poorly. Vorin delivered the verdict. Seraphyne Vaelor. You are judged unfit for standard instruction. You will be placed under observation protocol. Any future incidents will escalate to binding. A hush swept the room. Binding was not imprisonment. Binding was the theft of magic. Seraphyne bowed, not obedience. Survival. Varun raised his staff. This conclave is... The chamber doors slammed open. King Alaric I strode inside in full court attire. Masters bowed, some sincerely, others by duty. So it seems, Alaric said, and I arrive at an interesting moment. He studied Seraphyne openly, then spoke. I will be taking her into my protection, effective immediately. Shock rippled through the chamber. Vorin protested. She is untrained and dangerous. Good, Alaric replied. She will occupy my time more productively than yours. Vorin recovered first. Your Majesty, with respect, the girl does not hold sufficient rank, nor the training required for court service. She is dangerous and presently under disciplinary action. Good, Alaric said flatly. Court service will occupy her more productively than censure. Thalos interjected, voice strained. The crown does not have authority to reassign order property. Alaric's gaze sharpened. Property? An uncomfortable silence followed. Thalos chose his words with care. She is a ward of the order until her training is complete. Then consider this an acceleration of training, Alaric replied. I will appoint her a tutor. Vorin inhaled sharply. Who, Majesty? There are none qualified who are not already bound to council duties. Alaric glanced to the galleries, eyes settling upon Archmagus Kael'thar Ignivar. Him, the king said. Kael'thar can do it. Dozens of eyes turned to the Archmagus. Kael'thar did not move. His expression remained unreadable save for the faintest narrowing of the eyes. High Seer Thalos cleared his throat. Your Majesty, Archmagus Ignivar is not available for that task. He departs within the fortnight to the western court of King Dareth Vaelor. His appointment has been sealed by treaty and ratified by both crowns. Alaric's jaw tightened, not with surprise but annoyance. So be it. He took one slow step forward, cloak whispering across the stone. Then I will appoint my own. Vorin dared a final objection. Your Majesty, court tutors are traditionally chosen from the order. To appoint an outsider? I did not ask for tradition, Alaric cut in. I asked for the law. Vorin fell silent. Because by law, the crown could appoint. Alaric turned to the assembly. I appoint Lady Marianne Voss as tutor. She is versed in both etiquette and statecraft. Seraphyne Vaelor will serve as apprentice chronicler to the crown. But she is not trained, Thalos tried again. She cannot be trusted with... Alaric smiled without warmth. Then it is fortunate she will be under my surveillance, not yours. No one challenged him after that. Alaric rested a hand on Seraphine's shoulder. The weight of claim, not comfort. This conclave is concluded. Seraphyne followed him out, one bitter thought burning behind her eyes. The son of the king who stole my father now claims to protect me. There was no poetry in it, only irony. In the corridor beyond the chamber, footsteps followed. Seraphyne spun. Kelthar. Are you mad? She hissed. You told me to stay quiet, not to draw attention. And now you throw me at the king? Are you trying to get me killed? Kelthar remained calm. If he had not intervened, the council would have bound you, possibly for life. Seraphyne faltered. Kelthar continued. You are not popular with the conclave. You are unpredictable. The order does not tolerate unpredictability. So your brilliant idea was to give me to the crown? It was the only solution that didn't end in silence. She stared. You suggested it. To the king. Kelthar inclined his head. The order would have done worse. Then finally the truth. The order sees you as a threat, and the crown sees you as an asset. You can survive the latter. He turned to leave, guards approaching. When they begin to fear you more than they need you, do not kneel. Seraphyne stood alone, realizing she had not escaped judgment. She had merely been moved to a different board, a different game, and someone out there expected her to win. When the royal decree arrived, Seraphyne assumed the order had chosen to banish her for defiance. She packed her things in silence. One satchel, one coat, no books. As she stepped into the carriage, she pressed one finger to the door frame and whispered a word of protection written in silent flame. Alaric believed he had acquired a weapon. The order believed they had placed a leash.
Some powers were never meant to be taught. They burn through books and bypass incantations, answering not to instruction, but to instinct. And to those rare souls who can survive the cost. Be sure to return next week for Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. The Awakening of the Scholar of Fire. Life in the castle wasn't as horrible as she thought it was going to be. Sure, every movement she made was being watched, but it was also at the Pyrrhic order. The first tutor lady, Marianne Voss, handpicked by King Alaric himself. She arrived at the royal library precisely at dawn, her steps measured, her silver mantle uncreased despite the morning mist. She found Seraphyne already seated at the long oak table, arms folded, eyes half-lidded in a look that suggested neither obedience nor rebellion, but something more irritating to nobles, disinterest. Voss took her seat opposite the girl and placed a stack of tomes between them with ceremonial precision. Today, she said, we begin with the elements of court conduct. You are to serve in proximity to His Majesty. This requires refinement, restraint, and awareness of station. Seraphyne blinked once, then said nothing. Voss opened the first book, the Codex of Heraldic Posture and Noble Bearing, and recited the opening doctrine on proper greetings for monarchs, archons, and landed nobles. When she reached the appropriate angle of bow before the crown, she paused and gestured. Stand, please. Seraphyne stood. Bow. Seraphyne stared at her. Why? Voss inhaled sharply, as if air itself had offended her sensibilities. Because the crown embodies the realm. To bow is to acknowledge hierarchy, protection, and duty. Seraphyne neither moved nor blinked. And what if the crown doesn't protect you? The question was not delivered with spite, but with the cold clarity of someone who had seen kings break promises to the poor. Voss felt the floor tilt beneath her composure. The crown protects the realm, she said. It did not protect old Varen's hold, Seraphyne replied. That was day one, and things never improved. The incident of kneeling. The real breaking came in the main audience chamber. Lady Voss rehearsed the moment with obsessive detail. When His Majesty enters, you kneel, not as submission, but as ceremony. Understand? Seraphyne nodded. When King Alaric entered, nobles bent knee like fields bowing to the wind. Seraphyne did not move. Alaric noticed. Of course he noticed, but said nothing. His eyes flicked to Voss, then back to Seraphyne. Only after the court had dispersed did Voss confront her. "Why did you not kneel?" Seraphyne shrugged. "He already knows who I am." "That is not the point," Voss snapped. "Ceremony is the point. It is structure. It is order. It keeps the court from tearing itself to pieces." Seraphyne considered this, then said, "I would kneel for someone who would kneel for me." Voss stared at her for a long moment, heart hammering, not with anger but with dawning horror. There was no arrogance in the statement. There was conviction, and conviction is infinitely more dangerous. Lady Voss introduced wine protocol. 3 glasses were arranged on the table, 1 for water, 1 for white wine, 1 for red. "Note the stem," Voss instructed, lifting the glass delicately. "We hold from here to prevent the warmth of one's hand from altering the wine's character." Seraphyne stared at her. "And what do we do?" she said slowly. "If the wine doesn't matter?" Voss blinked. "Wine always matters." "No," Seraphyne replied. "War matters. Borders matter. The order matters. The codex matters. But wine—" She flicked the stem with her finger, and the glass vibrated. "Wine is a distraction?" Lady Voss inhaled, eyes narrowing in polite horror. "Wine," she said in a voice brittle as glass, "is civilization." Seraphyne stood abruptly. "I need to speak to the king." Voss froze. "Absolutely not. You are here to learn decorum." Seraphyne was already walking toward the door. Alaric was in his solar, reviewing dispatches from the western frontier. 2 guards intercepted her at the threshold, halberds crossed. Seraphyne stopped, unafraid. "Let me through." "You may not enter without summons." Seraphyne raised her palm. The torches lining the hall bent toward her in a ripple of flame, not expanding, not flaring, simply leaning, like flowers toward the sun. The guards fell silent. Alaric stood inside, watching with the expression of a man who very rarely encountered surprise. "Let her in," he said quietly. Seraphyne stepped past the guards, shut the door behind her, and faced the king with zero hesitation. He regarded her for a long moment before speaking. "You are not scheduled for instruction here, acolyte." "Good," Seraphyne said. "This isn't instruction." He set down his quill. "Oh? Then what is it?" "A question." His brows lifted. "Ask." Seraphyne drew a breath, steady, controlled, more than Kelthar had ever given her credit for. "Am I here to learn how to drink wine," she said, "or am I here to win wars?" The words hung between them, sharp as drawn steel. Alaric leaned back slowly, studying her. "Lady Voss believes you need refinement." "Refinement doesn't change the outcome of battles," Seraphyne replied. "It doesn't stop mages from burning cities. It doesn't keep the order from binding people they don't understand." He tilted his head. "You consider yourself misunderstood?" "I consider myself wasted," she said. That got a reaction, a very slight narrowing of his eyes, not anger, but interest. "You speak boldly," he said. "You put me here," she answered. "Was it to civilize me or to use me?" That hit harder than any bow or apology. A lesser king might have blustered or dismissed her. Alaric did neither. He stood, walked to the window overlooking the training yards, and gestured for her to join him. Below, soldiers drilled in formation. Mages practiced wardcraft. Siege crews loaded training ballista bolts. "These are the men who enforce my will," he said. She did not look away. "And what am I?" His answer was quiet. "Potential." Seraphine's jaw tightened, not in pride but frustration. "I don't want to kneel to wine glasses," she said. "I want to change the shape of the world." Alaric finally faced her fully. "Then learn both," he said. "A weapon that cannot survive court is a weapon that will be turned against itself." It was the closest thing to mentorship he had ever offered. Seraphyne absorbed it with the grim practicality of someone who understood war better than etiquette. "And when do I start with something that matters?" she asked. Alaric smiled, thin, sharp, calculating. "Soon?" She bowed then, not properly, not deeply, but enough to acknowledge the answer, and turned to leave. Before she reached the door, Alaric added, "Oh, an acolyte." She paused. "Do not threaten the wine again. The nobles will riot, and I need them alive for a while longer." She left without laughing, but her eyes held the faintest spark of amusement. The dinner debacle, Seraphyne attend a formal dinner with the lesser nobility. Lady Voss spent hours rehearsing etiquette. Sit only when invited. Speak only when addressed. Never refuse a toast. Use the correct spoon. Seraphyne listened without interrupting, nodded once, and walked into the dining hall like a soldier on reconnaissance. The nobles watched her, a curiosity, a court pet, a dangerous rumor. Voss signaled her to bow before seating. Seraphyne ignored it entirely and sat with the calm finality of a queen. Lady Voss's jaw tensed. Wine was poured. Toast began, meaningless strings of self-congratulation disguised as loyalty. When the glass reached Seraphyne, she asked flatly, "To what am I toasting?" Silence. A minor baron answered stiffly, "To King Alaric for uniting the realm." Seraphyne raised the glass, studying the reflection of the chandelier in the liquid. "My father conscripted into that uniting," she said. "He never returned home." The baron coughed. Someone dropped a spoon. A lady nearly choked on a grape. Voss closed her eyes for a brief, silent prayer to the gods of diplomacy. Seraphyne drank anyway. A few days later, King Alaric had summoned the entire court to the throne room. Nobles, chamberlains, advisors, and guards standing in their gilded rows beneath banners of midnight blue and silver. Seraphyne entered with the rest of the court, found her assigned place among the crown's retainers, and stood with hands folded behind her back. To her left stood Captain Rein, polished, composed, and already trying to pretend he didn't despise formal gatherings. They exchanged the smallest of nods, acknowledgement, not warmth. A hush rippled through the hall as the king raised one hand. Conversation halted mid-sentence. Fabric stilled, and the air held its breath. "Today," Alaric proclaimed, voice swelling beneath the vaulted ceiling, "is a joyous occasion. My son, Prince Alaric, will be wedded to Princess Eleanor of Savinka." Cheers and applause burst from the nobles like rehearsed thunder. Golden goblets lifted. Perfumed ladies clapped delicately behind their fans. Someone attempted to start a celebratory cheer and failed twice before catching rhythm. Seraphyne did not clap. She stared down at the polished marble instead, jaw tight, letting the noise wash over her like static. Out of the corner of his eye, Captain Rein noted her stillness. "Are you not happy for the prince?" he murmured. "No," Seraphyne replied without looking up. "I hate weddings." It was a lie. She had never attended one. She simply had no patience for ceremonies built on pretense and political convenience. As the applause finally died, King Alaric thanked the court for their attendance and dismissed them with a single sharp gesture. In an instant, the room dissolved into its natural swarm. Nobles converging on the young prince with congratulations, questions, and thinly veiled strategic smiles. Seraphyne watched them for all of 5 seconds before deciding she would have gladly spent another hour listening to Lady Voss drone about which fork accompanied the 5th course of a 9-course meal rather than endure another breath of pomp and circumstance. At least with Voss, there had been clarity. Forks went from the outside in. Politics came with no such simple rules. That night, the king departed on state business, with half his retinue in tow, leaving the palace quieter than usual. The cheers had faded, the banners had settled, and the nobles had returned to their estates. Yet Seraphyne could not shake the feeling that something unseen had shifted beneath all the celebration. Weddings were alliances. Alliances were knives. And courts were where knives were carried in plain sight. The next day, Seraphyne was enjoying a brief reprieve from her studies. She had endured enough etiquette drills to last a lifetime and found Lady Voss's lessons more taxing than any spell work. Wandering the corridors in search of distraction, she soon found herself inside the royal library. A vast chamber lined with towering shelves and books stacked like bricks in a fortress of knowledge. She skimmed titles without much interest until something strange happened. A tingling sensation rippled down her spine. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. A faint bluish glow pulsed from one of the shelves to her right. She blinked, looked forward again. Nothing else glowed. Drawn toward the light, she stopped before a dusty volume whose title was barely legible. Encyclopedia of Arcane Magic and Enchantments. No other volume sat beside it. No other books glowed. She pulled it free and flipped through a few pages. The text was written in a language she had never seen. She kept turning pages until, before her eyes, the ink rearranged itself, shifting and sliding across the parchment until the words resolved into common. Seraphyne snapped the book shut and glanced around. No one noticed her. No one questioned her. Courtiers and attendants went about their duties as if nothing strange had happened at all. She tucked the book under her arm, exited the library, and returned to her chambers. She slid the tome into her desk drawer, shut it, and hurried off to her next lesson. That night, after the palace had quieted, she opened the drawer again. The book was waiting. She set it before her on the desk and began to read. This was no novice spell book. It was advanced arcane theory of a kind the order had never allowed her near. The pages hummed with enchantments, diagrams, and spell work beyond her training. One entry caught her eye: invisibility. Fascinated, she read the entire passage without speaking a single incantation, and as she had done during the trial of controlled will, she simply willed it. Did it work? She didn't feel different. She turned to the mirror. There was no reflection, only an empty desk chair. Seraphyne waved her arms experimentally. Nothing. She grinned. There was only one obvious target to torment. Lady Voss. She nearly laughed aloud. She leaned close to the mirror, making faces no one could see. The thrill of mischief was intoxicating. Her door was unlocked. 2 night guards stood outside, tasked with keeping her in after dark. She usually obeyed that rule. Tonight she did not. She eased the latch open. One guard noticed immediately. "My lady, you're not permitted to leave after—" He never finished. She was already halfway down the hall. Seraphyne searched the palace's guest corridors for Lady Voss's room, moving unseen past servants and guards. Nearing the upper balconies that overlooked the grand ballroom, she paused. Faint music and laughter drifted up from below. Curious, she approached the railing and looked down. A private late-night gathering was underway. Nobles, courtiers, and visiting dignitaries mingling in elegant attire, masks and silks glimmering in the candlelight. Champagne flutes clinked, dancers whirled, and laughter spilled through the room in waves. It was lavish, decadent, and wildly different from the order's austerity. But what froze her in place was the pair at the center of the celebration. Lady Voss, draped upon a chaise, smiling coyly, and a visiting duke, pouring wine for her with extravagant gallantry. The courtiers laughed at some whispered joke. Lady Voss pressed a hand dramatically to her chest, pressed close against the duke, his hands tangled in her silk skirts and her giggling breath hot on his cheek. Then it happened to kiss, not just a friendly peck on the cheek. A rush of disgust twisted in Seraphine's stomach, not because of impropriety, but because of the hypocrisy of it. Lady Voss, the pinnacle of restraint and etiquette by day, now basking in whispered secrets and royal attention by night. Clutching the railing, horrified by the duplicity, her stomach turned and she stumbled back from the balcony, gagging. The guards, unaware she had ever left, still stood at their post. She slipped past them and shut the door firmly behind her. She dropped the invisibility spell. Her breath came fast, her hands trembling with fury. She paced. "Do I tell the king? Do I stay silent?" She stopped suddenly. "No, there's another option." A slow smile crept across her face. This could be useful. She extinguished the candles, slid into bed, and drifted to sleep wearing the kind of smile that precedes very interesting decisions. The next morning, Lady Voss resumed instruction with immaculate poise, as if nothing in the world had ever shaken her composure. "Lesson 6, she announced, tapping the ledger. "The appropriate response to impropriety is—" Seraphine's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Is dismissal? Is it not? Or does that only apply when the other party is not titled?" Lady Voss froze. The 2 chambermaids dusting the window paused mid-sweep, eyes wide as sparrows. Lady Voss recovered quickly, or tried to. She turned slowly, her smile stretched thin. "I beg your pardon?" Seraphyne held her gaze unblinking. "Last night," she said, tone flat, "in the ballroom, the Duke of Caromere seemed quite taken with your refinement." The blood drained from Lady Voss's face so fast it seemed to leave streaks. "Lower your voice," she hissed. "No," Seraphyne replied plainly. Lady Voss stepped closer, eyes darting to the servants, then back to Seraphyne, with burning embarrassment sharpened into anger. "You will not speak of that again. Do you understand?" Seraphyne tilted her head thoughtfully. "That depends. Are you teaching me to master propriety or hypocrisy? I need clarity if I am to represent the crown, after all." The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. The sharpest weapons in court were the quiet ones. Lady Voss swallowed, shoulders rigid. "You know nothing of the arrangements of nobles. Affairs, Seraphyne interrupted, are not improper as long as the participants have titles. I am learning." Lady Voss's eyes flickered with naked fury, but beneath it, fear. For the first time, Seraphyne understood why Kelthar had sent her here. The court fed on secrets. Lady Voss wielded etiquette like armor, but Seraphyne had just removed it with a sentence. "You will keep silent," Lady Voss finally whispered, voice trembling. Seraphyne stepped forward until they were nearly nose to nose, and lowered her voice into something that made the chambermaids withdraw instinctively. "I kept silent when it mattered," she said. "When I was bound, when I was judged, when I survived things you would break beneath." Lady Voss flinched. Seraphyne continued, "If you want me to learn grace, teach me something worth learning. Otherwise, stop wasting my time." She turned, walking toward the practice hall door without waiting for dismissal. "Where are you going?" Lady Voss demanded, rattled. "To find someone who can teach me how to survive wars," Seraphyne answered, not looking back. "Your lessons only seem to prepare people for scandals." The door shut behind her. Lady Voss sank into her chair, breathing hard, realizing with a chill that she had not merely been challenged, she had been outmaneuvered, and Seraphyne Vaelor had done it without magic at all. Lady Voss submitted her resignation 3 days later.
Enough of lessons. It's time to learn something that matters. Return next week for part 2 of The Awakening of the Scholar of Fire.
The second tutor, Master Halbrand, Obedience and Equations. Master Halbrand arrived 3 days after Lady Voss fled the palace. He was tall, pinched-faced, and so thin that he resembled a quill made flesh. All sharp angles, stiff posture, and ink-stained fingers. He greeted Seraphyne with no bow, no courtesy, and not a hint of interest. "I do not care for politics," he said by way of introduction. "I do not indulge arrogance, and I do not suffer prodigies who believe talent outweighs discipline." Seraphyne blinked once. "Good," she said. "I don't either." It was the last time they agreed on anything. Halbrand's curriculum was not about fire as Seraphyne understood it. He taught arcanodynamics, the mathematics of magic, energy exchange, ley elasticity, volatile resonance, structural collapse tolerances. While Seraphyne viewed flame as alive, Halbrand reduced it to diagrams and decimal points. "To produce stable ignition," he droned, chalk tapping the slate, "one must consider mana density, elemental composition, and ambient astral pressure. Repeat." Seraphyne stared at the diagram. "That's not how it behaves." Halbrand froze mid-tap. "How what behaves?" "Fire." Halbrand let out a breath through his nose, a small, weary sigh. "Fire is not a creature, acolyte. It does not behave. It responds to input." Seraphyne considered that, then replied, "Tell that to a burning city." Halbrand paused long enough to realize she wasn't joking. "Your assignment," he snapped, "is to solve the formula on the board. No improvisation, no theatrics." Seraphyne solved it in less than 60 seconds, because Halbrand assumed she couldn't. Lesson 3. Controlled Resonance. By the 3rd week, Halbrand had made it his mission to break her habit of intuitive casting, the very thing that made her dangerous and exceptional. He set an iron brazier between them and lit a small flame within. Control the temperature precisely, he instructed. We are testing resonance stability, not spectacle. Seraphyne raised her hand over the brazier. The flame rose, lowered, flickered, calmed. But Halbrand wasn't satisfied. No, you are shaping without calculation, he scolded. You must quantify the energy, predict the result. Magic without equations is guesswork. Guesswork is how mages die. Seraphine's jaw tightened. And equations are how wars are lost while men like you debate variables. Halbrand's nostrils flared. War is not your concern, acolyte. Seraphyne turned toward him fully, the flame behind her bowing instinctively in her direction. Halbrand's first undeniable glimpse of her affinity. My entire life is war, she said quietly. Halbrand said nothing for the rest of the session. Lesson 5. Sparks and Steel. On the 5th lesson that week, Halbrand introduced volatile sparks, small nuggets of compressed magical energy used for battlefield ignition. Most students handled them with tongs. Seraphyne picked one up with her bare fingers. Halbrand nearly choked. Are you insane? Those can ignite at contact. Seraphyne examined the spark with clinical curiosity. It won't. You cannot know that. She looked him dead in the eyes. It's not afraid of me. Halbrand muttered something about reckless acolytes and natural selection, but he never forgot that moment. The South Lecture Hall off the Royal Library was not meant to inspire awe. It was a practical room. Stone walls, high narrow windows, rows of benches worn smooth by years of restless students. At this hour, it was usually empty. Halbrand liked it that way. He could arrive early, arrange his notes, and fortify himself with silence before Seraphyne arrived to undo it. This morning, the door was already unlatched. He frowned, pushed it open, and stopped in the threshold. Seraphyne sat cross-legged on the long demonstration table, her back to one of the tall windows. Dawn light edged her hair in pale gold. Her right hand was upturned. In her palm, a flame no larger than a coin flickered. Halbrand almost called out to smother it. Then the flame stood. It stretched, thin as a thread, and then thicker, taking the shape of a tiny figure with arms and legs. For an instant it wobbled. Then, as Seraphyne turned her wrist, the little figure bowed. She smiled faintly. Left foot, she murmured. The flame person stepped. Right, it followed. She said nothing grand, no incantation or name of power, just quiet directives, like a girl instructing a child in its first dance. The flame obeyed, spinning in a clumsy circle, trailing sparks that faded before they touched her skin. Halbrand's heart beat very loudly in his ears. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him, without meaning to. The sound made the flame stumble. Seraphyne didn't startle. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes bright. You're early, she said. Halbrand moved closer, unable to stop himself. So are you, he managed. What in all the elder theorems are you doing? She looked back to her palm. Waiting for you. That, he said, pointing, is not waiting. That is unscripted elemental articulation. How are you maintaining form without a circle? Seraphyne tilted her hand. The flame person balanced, then dipped into a neat bow toward Halbrand. I asked it not to fall, she said. Halbrand stared. That is not an explanation. It works, she replied. The little figure began to dance again, more sure now. Tiny arms raised, legs kicking embers in tiny arcs. For a heartbeat, it had shoulders, hips, the suggestion of a face. Halbrand felt the fine hairs on his arms lift. Miss Seraphyne, he said carefully, flame does not do that. It does not look at people. It does not respond to suggestion. It follows gradients of heat and fuel. That is all. The flame person turned as if noticing him for the first time and seemed to lean in his direction. Seraphine's mouth twitched. It's curious, she said. You don't usually come in quietly. Halbrand swallowed. This is not amusing, he said, though his voice had softened into a kind of strained awe. You are performing invocation without a focus. Do you understand what could happen if... The tiny figure lengthened suddenly, its cloak of sparks flaring into a thin, rippling mantle. The light in the room shifted. Shadows on the walls drew back, as though trying to avoid its touch. The air vibrated, Not with heat exactly, but with attention. For a moment, Halbrand had the absurd, chilling impression that he was in the presence not of a trick, not of a spell, but of something that remembered what it was to burn before there were words for burning. He heard himself whisper, "That is not arcanodynamics. That is something older." Seraphyne watched the flame with the same calm interest she might give an insect on a windowsill. "I didn't call anything," she said quietly. "I just listened. It wanted to move. I let it." Halbrand forced himself to breathe. "Fire does not want," he said. "It reacts. We are the ones who want. We are the ones who direct. That distinction is the foundation of every—" The flame person turned its tiny, featureless head towards Seraphyne, as if in recognition. Then as she curled her fingers slowly into a fist, it bowed once more and collapsed inward without smoke, without scorch. Her palm was bare. Halbrand waited for the smell of char. There was none. The stone tabletop bore no mark. Seraphyne hopped down from the table. "So," she said, "what's today's lesson?" Halbrand set his satchel down very, very carefully. "Today's lesson," he said, "is cancelled." Her brows rose. "Did I pass?" "This is not a jest," he snapped, then caught himself, the words sounding too much like Lady Voss for his liking. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "You are working in directions no arcanist should." "Should?" Seraphyne repeated. "But can?" He looked up sharply. "You do not know where that road ends," he said. "No," she agreed. "Do you?" Halbrand opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he admitted. For a moment, the only sound was the distant murmur of the library beyond the door. "You are to leave that particular trick alone," he said finally, "until I understand it." "You don't," she said. His jaw tightened. "Until I do," he corrected. Seraphyne considered him for a heartbeat, then nodded once. "All right," she said. "I won't do it in front of you again." It was not the reassurance he had wanted, but it was the only one he was going to get. What finally shattered their working relationship was not flame, nor failed lessons, but Halbrand's ego. On the 12th lesson, during rigid exercises in heat inversion theory, Seraphyne interrupted mid-lecture. "Master Halbrand," she said suddenly. Halbrand didn't look up. "Not now." "Master Halbrand." His chalk snapped against the slate. "What, acolyte?" Seraphyne tilted her head slightly, studying the brazier between them. "Do you know," she said calmly, "how hot a flame would need to be to bring a man's blood to boil inside his body?" The room went silent. Halbrand stared at her, color draining from his face. "Why would you ask such a barbaric question?" Seraphyne shrugged. "You seem to believe I am a danger because I lack discipline. I want to know if you actually understand the dangers you lecture about." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then sputtered, "Nobody knows the answer to that." Seraphyne gave a faint, humorless smile. "I don't either, but I knew you didn't." For a long, terrible second, Halbrand said nothing, because for the first time, he was afraid she was right. He ended the lesson early without explanation. That night, long after the torches in the hallways had guttered low, Master Halbrand sat alone at his desk. Sheets of parchment lay before him, covered in hasty equations and half-sketched sigils. He had tried to map what he had seen, the stability of the flame's joints, the pattern of its motion, the absence of visible constraint. Every line ended in the same place, unknown variable. He rubbed at his eyes, feeling his age and the ache of his shoulders. In the end, he set aside the diagrams and reached instead for a fresh sheet. His handwriting, usually meticulous, wavered slightly on the first line. "To His Majesty's steward," he paused, then continued. "I refuse to instruct the acolyte Seraphyne Vaelor any further." Ink blotted at the end of the sentence. He blotted it with a cloth and kept writing. "This is not due to lack of aptitude. Quite the opposite. The girl's grasp of symbolic abstraction and arcanodynamic translation is formidable. She solves equations by intuition, then reverses them into coherent proofs after the fact. I have never seen its like." He hesitated, then added, "That is the problem." He stared at the words for a long moment. "She does not look at fire and see a tool. She looks at it and sees a question. and it appears intent on answering. In the margin, without meaning to, he wrote the image that would not leave him, a tiny figure of light bowing on a girl's palm. I am not afraid of her, the girl, though prudence would justify it. I am afraid of what she will become if left in the hands of men who value only outcomes and never methods. His pen slowed. If she ever answers her own questions, I pray to every god we no longer mention that she is on our side when she does. He sanded the ink, folded the letter, and sealed it with his personal sigil. In the morning, it found its way to the steward's desk. By midday, Master Halbrand Thalor's rooms were empty. When Seraphyne heard he was gone, she didn't smile or gloat. She simply asked, "Who's next?"
Master Halbrand tried to control me. He could not. Who's next? Come back next week for The Rise of the Ash Queen. Chapter 4. The Awakening of the Scholar of Fire. Part 3.
The third tutor, Captain Rein, Steel, Strategy, and Stubbornness. Captain Adric Rein did not bow when he entered the study hall. He didn't glare, posture, or pretend superiority either. He simply removed his gloves, tossed them on the table, and said, "Move the chairs. The king wants results, not etiquette." Seraphyne blinked. This was new. Most tutors began with formal greetings, curtsies, or condescending corrections. Rein began by rearranging furniture. "Why?" Seraphyne asked. "Because you're not here to pour wine or solve equations," Rein said. "You're here to survive a court that will try to kill you the moment you matter." His tone was not dramatic. It was factual. Seraphyne moved the chairs. Lesson 1. Understanding Danger. Rein opened a leather case and withdrew a set of carved figurines. Little soldiers, mages, and monsters. Not toys, tools. He placed a soldier at one end of the table, then a mage figure at the other. "Scenario," he began. "You are alone in open field. Mage with line of sight. No cover. No allies. What do you do?" Seraphyne stared at the board. "I kill the mage first." Rein raised a brow. "How?" Seraphyne reached across the table, flicked the mage figurine off the edge, and said, "Quickly?" Rein didn't smile, but his eyes showed the smallest glint of approval. "Correct, but incomplete. Killing the mage leaves you uncovered from the archer you didn't see." He placed a new figurine. Seraphyne frowned. "I didn't know about the archer." "Exactly," Rein replied. "Battles aren't about power, they're about information." For the first time since entering Alaric's court, Seraphyne leaned forward with genuine interest. Lesson 3. The Blade's Perspective. Halbrand had called war barbaric. Voss had called it uncouth. Rein called it geometry. He taught formation theory, line breaking, choke points, and cavalry wedges as if he were explaining a card game. He made her learn the weight distribution of weapons, even though she preferred spells. "Magic fails," he said one morning, handing her a wooden practice sword. "Steel does not. Learn both." Seraphyne swung the blade experimentally. "It's heavy." "That's because you're letting the sword do the thinking," Rein said. "Guide it." She frowned. "How?" Rein nodded once. "Good question. By understanding what it wants." That sentence lodged in Seraphine's mind, because it echoed something the Codex had once whispered. Fire wanted, blood wanted, now steel wanted. She was beginning to see a pattern no one else had noticed. Lesson 7. Torment by Honesty. Rein lasted longer than the others, because Seraphyne didn't torment him for sport. She challenged him because he was worth it. During a discussion of battlefield command, Rein posed a brutal question. "Your scouts return with reports of 2 enemy forces, one exhausted and retreating, the other fresh and entrenched. You can only strike one." "Which?" Seraphyne answered immediately. "The entrenched force." Rein nodded. "Why?" "Because if they are entrenched, they want you to attack them. If you kill the exhausted force instead, the entrenched army will pursue and finish you once you're tired." Rein froze. "That is..." Correct, he admitted slowly. But it is not the answer most commanders give. What do they say? Seraphyne asked. They hit the exhausted force first, because they mistake weakness for opportunity. Seraphyne tilted her head slightly. Then they deserve to lose. Rein exhaled a quiet laugh, not mocking but surprised. You'll make enemies saying things like that. Seraphyne replied, Everyone seems determined to be my enemy anyway. I may as well give them a reason. Rein paused at that, studying her with a soldier's eye, the eye that looked for wounds beneath armor. Has anyone taught you how to make allies? Seraphyne blinked once. Have you seen anyone try? Rein regretted asking. Lesson 10. The court watch's word spread quietly through the court. Captain Rein was succeeding where scholars and nobles failed. Servants saw Seraphyne carrying maps, not wine cups. Guards saw her spar with wooden blades instead of sulking in libraries. Even the king observed their sessions from afar. Not with fear, with calculation. It wasn't fire. It wasn't violence. It was a truth no one in the court ever spoke aloud. Near the end of their second month, Rein was lecturing on acceptable losses in wartime, how commanders preserved armies by sacrificing units, how strategy often demanded human math. He tapped a map with a thin carved stick, moving figurines into sacrificial lines. To him it was clinical, an exercise. To Seraphyne, it was familiar. Sometimes, he said calmly, a commander must send men to die so that the army may live. Seraphyne stared at the figurine he had just isolated. A lone soldier, cut off, condemned to fall. And who decides which men those are? She asked. The commander, he replied without hesitation. Such is the burden of leadership. She tilted her head slightly. No, that is the privilege of leadership. Rein stopped mid-word, but she wasn't finished. It takes a particular kind of arrogance, she continued, to believe your life is worth more than the ones you send to die. Rein opened his mouth, then closed it again. He struggled, not because he disagreed, but because the truth was too sharp to grasp comfortably. After a long silence, Seraphyne touched the lone figurine with her fingertip, nudging it just off the map's edge, as if disappearing into some ravine or northern wood. Knowing this, she said quietly, perhaps I blame the wrong man all these years. Rein frowned. What do you mean? She didn't look up. For years I hated King Cassian for sending my father to war. But kings don't lead charges through mountain passes. Commanders do. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was just true. Only then did she lift her eyes to him, slowly, deliberately, studying him. Not emotionally, analytically. Her gaze lingered on his posture, his hands, the soft lines near his eyes. For a brief, unnerving moment, Rein felt dissected, weighed, judged, like a guilty man waiting for a verdict. She considered him, truly considered him, and then softly, almost to herself, No, she murmured, you're not old enough. The words hit harder than an accusation, because in that instant, Rein realized she wasn't speaking metaphorically. She had actually wondered if he had been the one to sign the order that killed her father. She had measured him against that possibility and dismissed him. Rein exhaled. A sound half relief, half something he could not name. He dismissed her early that day. Rein's decision. Unlike Lady Voss and Master Halbrand, Rein did not flee or resign. He requested an audience with King Alaric. She is not a student, he told the king quietly. She is a commander waiting for a battlefield. Alaric regarded him carefully. Is she ready? No, Rein admitted, but she never will be if you leave her in these halls. The king leaned forward. And what do you recommend, Captain? Rein hesitated only a moment. Send her with me. Let her see war up close. Not theory, reality. She needs to understand what burns when flame is unleashed. Alaric folded his hands, considering. Will you take responsibility for her education? Rein bowed his head. With my life, if necessary. Alaric studied him for a long time, then nodded once. So be it. Seraphyne was in her room, studying her book, when there came a knock at the door. She quickly slipped the book into the drawer. Enter. A young woman stepped inside and immediately knelt, bowing her head. "My Lady Val," was as far as she got before Seraphyne cut her off. "No, you will not address me by that name. You'll call me Seraphyne." "But my Seraphyne, that would be improper." "Get up," Seraphyne said. "Look me in the eyes. Why are you here?" The young woman straightened, still nervous. "The king has ordered my father to make armor for you. I'm here to take your measurements." "Really?" Seraphyne was genuinely surprised. "I didn't think he cared." A week later, Seraphyne had her new leather armor on and was dancing around her room. It was a little stiff, brand new, but she had been told it would soften with time. Deciding to show Rein her new gift, she left her room and headed for the courtyard. She arrived and immediately sensed something wasn't right. Rein sat with his back to the entrance, sharpening his sword on a stone. He never did that out in the open. Is this the lesson? She wondered. After a moment, she decided, yes, that's it. She cast her invisibility spell, raised her hand in front of her face and couldn't see it. Then she entered the courtyard, moved directly in front of Captain Rein with her arms crossed. Too easy, she thought. Then Rein spoke 3 simple words that made her freeze in place. "Good morning, Seraphyne." Seraphyne dropped the spell. How did you know?" "I see you finally found my grandfather's book," Rein said. "Your grandfather's book?" she repeated. "Yes, I placed it in the library the day you arrived. It appears you can read it, whereas I cannot." "Is this some sort of trick?" Seraphyne asked. "No, it's today's lesson. How I knew you were here. If you're going to master stealth, you need to understand the wind." "I don't understand. How does that explain?" "It's very easy," he interrupted. "You saw me with my back to the entrance and thought, he's exposed and moved in. What you didn't account for was the wind." He made a small gesture, and a very light breeze brushed across her skin. "You were standing downwind, Seraphyne. I could smell your perfume." Seraphyne nodded. There was nothing she could say. "You may go. Enjoy the rest of your day." He returned to sharpening his sword. Seraphyne, smiling to herself, happily left the courtyard. She never used perfume again. They arrived at the southern bastion for an inspection when Rein paused to speak with the bastion quartermaster. A broad-shouldered woman with ink-stained fingers and a scowl carved into permanent existence. Her name, Marla Dern, and she handled supply, food, arrows, armor, and coin. She bowed stiffly to Rein, hesitated when she saw Seraphyne, then got straight to the point. "We're short." Rein frowned. "Short of what?" "Everything," Marla replied. "Bread, salted pork, dried beans, hells, even horse grain. 2 caravans overdue by a fortnight, thirds 5 days late. And before you ask, no storms reported, no bandit sightings, no merchant complaints." Seraphyne tilted her head. "Then they didn't vanish on the roads." Marla blinked, taken aback by the certainty in her voice. Rein offered a diplomatic smile. "We'll inform the crown. Caravans go missing all the time near the frontier." Marla's scowl deepened. "A frontier caravan goes missing. Not 3. From 3 different cities, along 3 different routes." That gave even Rein pause. Seraphyne stepped forward. "Show me the maps." Marla led them to the bastion's low-ceilinged war chamber, a squat stone room smelling of candle wax, parchment, and stale air. Maps covered the central table, roads drawn in neat colored lines, supply routes marked with wooden tokens, small blocks representing units and scouts. Rein watched as Seraphyne moved around the table, studying quickly, silently, intensely. To her, maps were not abstractions. They were stories, written in ink and logistics. She traced the main supply road with 2 fingers. These 3 caravans, where were they last seen? Marla placed 3 red tokens. 1 near Harvest Reach, farmland. 1 near Ironford, bridges and mines. 1 near Airwell Wood, forests. Seraphyne considered for only a heartbeat. "They have nothing in common," she murmured. Rein nodded. "Exactly, which makes bandits unlikely, and storms would leave survivors or wreckage." Seraphine's finger moved again, slower this time, drawing invisible lines from each red token toward the bastion. Then, she stopped. "No," she whispered. She looked up sharply at Marla. These three roads do not converge. Marla shook her head. No, they don't. North, west, south. Seraphyne tapped the table hard. But the load destinations do. She dragged three thin strings, one blue, one red, one white, from each token to the bastion supply cache marker. 3 lines crossed in one place. Not on the roads, not in the cities, but at a lone black marker an inch east of the bastion. What is that? She asked. Marla exhaled hard through her nose. Greyburn Pass. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. A pass? Vaelor leaned over the map. It's an old mining road, narrow, steep, only used when the main roads are blocked. Seraphyne glanced between them. Is it guarded? Not anymore, Marla said quietly. Too costly to maintain during peacetime. Scouts ride it sometimes, but not enough to keep watch. Seraphyne looked back at the 3 strings. 3 supply caravans, 3 cities, 3 routes. All forced to choke through one narrow pass just before the bastion. They weren't taken on the road, she said. They were taken at the bottleneck. Vaelor's eyes widened. Marla swore under her breath. Seraphyne straightened. Send scouts to inspect the pass. Check for cart tracks, broken crates, signs of campfires, ash pits, anything. Vaelor hesitated. It could be dangerous. Ambush, renegades, deserters. Seraphyne met his gaze head-on. So is starvation. The scouts left before dusk. They returned near midnight with news that changed everything. Marla stormed into the war room first, face pale. Found the bastards. Vaelor stood. Bandits? No, Marla spat. Soldiers. Seraphine's brow furrowed. Whose? Marla dropped a torn scrap of blue and gold livery onto the table. Valamir. Vaelor went rigid. That's impossible. Those are royal colors. Only supply guards and logistics carry that. Marla cut him off. That's not all. We found barrels of grain, crates of salted pork, and 2 full wagons of medical supplies, hidden under camouflage canvas. Not stolen, stored. Seraphyne felt the back of her neck prickle. Stored for what? Marla lowered her voice. For a siege. Vaelor's pulse quickened. Whose siege? Marla stared at him, then at Seraphyne, then at the map. No idea, but someone in Valamir is preparing for a war we haven't been told about. Sealed for the crown, Vaelor immediately drafted an urgent dispatch to the capital. But Seraphyne took the map and, without asking permission, walked straight into the bastion's communications room. What are you doing? Vaelor hissed. Seraphyne looked at him like it was obvious. The king needs to see the exact routes, not your summary. She pressed her hand over the wax of the seal he'd prepared, then gestured for more wax. You write better, she said. I think faster. Vaelor stared at her, then began writing again, this time including her map geometry, the pass location, the evidence of military-grade supply hoarding. When they finished, Vaelor sealed the scroll. Seraphyne added a second seal, Kelthar's sigil, still on her satchel from the library mission. Vaelor froze. You shouldn't. He'll read it, she said simply, and she was right. The response arrived faster than any of them expected, 3 days later on the wings of a royal hawk. Alaric did not send a letter. He sent himself. His arrival at the bastion sent the garrison into controlled chaos. Officers rushed. Soldiers formed ranks. Courtiers set up tents. The king rode straight through them, jaw tight, cloak snapping behind him. His first words upon dismounting, "Where is the girl?" Seraphyne stepped forward without bowing. "Sire," Alaric gestured sharply to the war table. "Show me." She did, cleanly, efficiently, without nervousness or deference. She traced the strings, the bottleneck, the pass, the supply stash. When she finished, he asked only one question. "How did you see it?" Seraphyne shrugged slightly. "I didn't see bandits. I saw logistics." Alaric's gaze sharpened. "And what do you see now?" Seraphyne met his eyes without hesitation. "A conspiracy, not against the bastion, against you." Vaelor inhaled sharply. Marla looked away. Alaric remained very still. Then he said, "Give me privacy." The officers and soldiers filed out. Only Seraphyne remained. Alaric studied her as if weighing a weapon in his hand. Did anyone teach you to think this way? He asked. No. Did Kelthar tell you to involve me? No. Do you know what this discovery may mean? Seraphyne hesitated, then answered honestly. War. The king's lips twitched. Not a smile, not quite approval, something colder and more dangerous. Good, he said. You see clearly. He turned away, clasping his hands behind him. Varen will be reassigned. You will report to me directly. The order will be informed after the fact. Seraphyne blinked. Why? Alaric looked back over his shoulder. Because the order trains mages. I need war ministers. Far north in the Iron Court of Halvern, King Seraphyne Vaelor received Kelthar's quiet report. The king has taken her. Dareth sat upon a throne forged from dark iron and cold stone, his massive frame wrapped in wolf furs. His eyes, gray as winter storms, studied the parchment long after reading. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rumbling, dangerous. Does she have the codex? Kelthar folded his hands inside his sleeves. The codex has chosen her, yes, but the king does not understand what that means. Dareth's jaw flexed. And the order? Blindsided, afraid. They will stall. They will pretend control. They will fail. Dareth nodded. And you? Do you intend to interfere? Kelthar looked up, meeting the Iron King's gaze without fear. Interfere? No, observe. Always. Dareth grunted in approval. Let Alaric enjoy his new toy. In time, he will learn the truth. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You do not use fire. You survive it. He waved a dismissive hand. Prepare the Iron Cohort. We move south before spring thaw. Kelthar bowed faintly. As you command. But as he turned to leave, Dareth added one final order, one that would shape wars to come. And send ravens to the free cities. Tell them the Ash of Valamir now sits at Alaric's right hand. Some will fear it. The wise will prepare. Kelthar paused only long enough to murmur, wise indeed. As he departed, the Iron King smiled, a cold, predatory expression. The board is set, he said to no one. Let the kings play. Chapter 5. The War of Two Kingdoms. The first spring of the war smelled like thawed mud and new banners. Seraphyne stood at the edge of the training yard as the Western legions formed in the lower city, shields bright, spears straight, the royal comet stitched on fresh midnight blue cloaks. Beyond them, the stone bulk of High Kesserin Gate waited like a clenched jaw, the last bite of the capital before the road turned west. Captain Varen found her there. He wore full campaign armor now, not the polished compromise he'd favored at court. The plates were darkened from past marches, the red-brown cloak trimmed for practicality rather than pageantry. His helm hung at his hip. His face was carved into the calm of a man who had already accepted that not everyone he was looking at would come home. Acolyte, he said. Seraphyne, she corrected out of habit. He let that pass. The king wants you in the war chamber. Bring your map case. She had one now, leather worn in at the edges from long hours over parchment. It felt heavier that morning. As she followed Varen up the stairs toward the old tower where the war councils met, the city below them thrummed with the restless energy of departure. Smiths shouting for last fittings, horses stamping, mothers and lovers whispering prayers at doorways. The war didn't start with a battle cry. It started with lists. The war chamber was crowded enough that the air itself seemed to hold its breath. A round room, high windows, a single great table at its center. Maps of the western marches sprawled across it. The Vaelin River drawn in thick blue. The border forts marked in neat black script. Villages and market towns scattered like seeds between them. Little wooden markers, blocks for infantry, wedges for cavalry, flared shapes for mage detachments, waited in tidy stacks. King Alaric stood at the far side of the table. He wore no crown, just a dark doublet in the quiet, consuming focus that had once held a broken realm together. To his right were generals and lord commanders. To his left stood quartermasters and ministers. Varen slid into a space near the center. Seraphyne took her place just behind him, close enough to see the maps, far enough to pretend she wasn't there. "Begin," Alaric said. General Maros, the one with the scar splitting his beard, tapped a calloused finger on the river. "Your Majesty, our problem remains the same," he said. "Caravans bound for Kesserin and the Western armories have gone missing between Stonebridge and the Vaelor Ford. Iron, grain, mage-grade reagents, all under treaty protection." He slid a smaller parchment forward. More names, more numbers. Seraphyne saw the columns. Weight, value, destinations that had never been reached. Alaric glanced at the list only briefly. "And Valoran patrols?" he asked. "Seen more often each month on the eastern bank," Maros said. "Dareth claims he's guarding the trade roads from bandits. Our traders report being escorted away from alternate routes." "Supplies vanish on our side," Alaric said flatly. "Patrols increase on his. His coffers are thin. His pride is not. We all know what this is." "Preparation," another lord muttered. "Provocation," Seraphyne thought. Alaric's gaze moved to Varen. "Captain," he said, "you argued against committing the full Western strength in a first campaign." "Yes, Majesty," Varen replied. His voice was steady, his shoulders squared. "A single decisive push is tempting, but we don't yet know if Dareth intends a limited border grab or a long war. If we overextend early and he's ready for it, we bleed for nothing." "And your recommendation?" Alaric asked. "Hold the crossings first," Varen said, reaching for a stack of wooden blocks. He placed them along the Vaelor. "Kesserin, Stonebridge, the fords at Low Vaelor and Heroin. Make it clear that to move his legions, he has to break his teeth on our defenses." He added wedge markers behind the blocks. "Send full legions?" Maros asked. "A mix," Varen said. "Heavy infantry at Kesserin, light and medium at the fords, scouts in the hills, cavalry split, half to screen our flanks, half held back to strike at any siege trains he lumbers forward." "And our mages?" a minister asked. At that word, several gazes flicked toward Seraphyne. She kept her face neutral. "Integrated," Varen said, "as they were designed. Pyrrhic detachments attached to each major position. No isolated mage corps. No grand displays. Wards for the bridges, counterstorms for his lightning if he fields the Tempest Order." "If," Alaric repeated mildly. Varen inclined his head. "Rumor is not reconnaissance, Majesty." Seraphyne watched their hands more than their faces, the way fingers hovered over the map, the care with which they placed the wooden markers. Men in stories often spoke of war as passion, rage, glory, vengeance. Here it looked like accounting. Alaric nodded once. "Do it," he said. "Kesserin is yours, Captain Varen. You will hold the river, acolyte Seraphyne." Her heart stumbled when he said her name. "Yes, your Majesty," she said. "You will accompany him," Alaric said. "As observer. You are not to engage in combat. You will learn how war is made in the spaces between battles. Do you understand?" "Not quite." "Yes, Majesty," she said anyway. "Say it clearly," he replied. "I will observe only," Seraphyne said. "No combat, no spell work without explicit order." It was like reciting an oath with her throat. Alaric's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, then shifted back to the table. "The war of two kings begins with discipline," he said softly. "Not spectacle." There was no cheer, no pounding of fists, just the quiet clatter of markers being moved into place. The western road unrolled beneath them in long, weary miles, out of the capital past plowed fields and weary villages, through low hills feathered with scrub and young pines. The legions moved in steady lines, infantry in the center, wagons and siege components trudging between them, cavalry fanning out like shadows on the flanks. Seraphyne rode near the command group. Varen, a handful of officers, 2 Pyrrhic mage officers, whose job was to coordinate the battle mages assigned to this column. She watched everything. "Why do the archers walk behind the spear line?" she asked one afternoon, as the column wound through a narrow defile. Varen shifted in his saddle. "Because spears break charges. If the enemy hits us here, we'll want the spears braced and the archers shooting over them." "But if you were on flat ground," she said, "then the archers might be forward," one of the officers answered, "until the enemy closed. War isn't a single formation, acolyte. It's choosing the least bad of many bad options, over and over. She filed that away. 3 weeks out, scouts came galloping in from the vanguard, a pair of light cavalrymen marked with the blue comet on their pauldrons and mud up to their knees. Sighted Vaeloran banners across the Vaelin, one reported. Camped on the far bank just east of Kesserin. No engines yet. Cavalry patrols. We saw mages, we think. How? Varen asked. Lightning, the scout said. On a clear night. Striking the water in patterns, not storms. Couldn't get closer without losing men. Varen's jaw tightened, but his tone didn't change. Thank you, he said. Eat, rest, then back out. We'll need eyes north and south of the fort as well. They reached Kesserin 2 days later. The fort rose from its rocky hill like a stone fist beside the river. The Vaelin ran wide and cold beneath it, swollen with snowmelt, the only crossing for leagues the black stone bridge clinging to the fort's shadow. Smoke rose in thin lines from within the walls. A worn banner fluttered in the wind. Kesserin's garrison turned out to meet them. Tired men, but disciplined. Commander Thalin greeted Varen with a clasped forearm and a grim half-smile. You bring more steel than I hoped, he said, and more horses. The king intends to keep this river, Varen said. Thalin's gaze skipped past Seraphyne, curious for a heartbeat, then moved on. She liked him better for that. They made camp within the fort and along the western bank. Tents in orderly rows, cook fires flaring as the evening deepened. Across the river, in the Vaeloran camp, answering points of light kindled in a rougher pattern. Seraphyne stood on the parapet that night, fingers curled around cool stone, and watched the enemy. Their banners bore Dareth's sigil, a black dragon coiled around a crimson crown. Their camp sprawled along the opposite slope like a dark wound. No siege engines yet, no massed lines, just presence. Do they know I'm here? She asked. Varen stood beside her, helm under his arm. The wind tugged at his cloak. Doubtful, he said. Dareth may have heard rumors of the Pyrrhic experiment at court, but he won't know what you look like. To him, you're a story written in other men's fear. A strange kind of anonymity. They're mages, she said after a moment. The ones the scouts saw. She pointed toward the far side of the camp, where occasional flickers of unnatural light pricked the darkness. Likely his Tempest mages, Varen said. Battle mages trained to call lightning. They'll be attached to his elite units, not shoved in the middle of the grunts. Like ours, she said. Like ours, he agreed. But remember this, most of the killing will still be done by men with spears and bows. Mages change moments, not the entire shape of a campaign. Anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't buried enough soldiers. She said nothing. Later that spring, when the first skirmish came, she watched from a low ridge west of the fort as Varen had ordered. Dareth sent nothing grand, just a probing force. Medium cavalry, a swathe of infantry, a few mage detachments staying well back. They advanced to test Kesserin's archers and walls, to measure response, not to commit. Varen declined to give them more. Seraphyne watched Alaric's infantry hold their lines, shields locked as arrows fell. She watched Kesserin's archers step up and loose in practiced volleys, the twang of bowstrings rolling up the slope like a very precise storm. She saw Pyrrhic ward mages raise layered shields against the first experimental arcs of lightning that crackled from the far bank, the strikes weaker than rumor had suggested, but precise enough to worry her. They're testing each other, Varen said, watching through a spyglass. Not the walls, not yet. And if you gave the order, she asked, if you sent our cavalry, our battle mages, then maybe we'd send them running, he said. Or maybe we'd step right into what Dareth wants us to do and lose 3 times what the ground is worth. Early battles are like first arguments. It's less about the words and more about finding out which parts of the other man's pride are brittle. The Vaeloran force retreated by afternoon, leaving a few bodies on the field and a scatter of broken arrows. There were no cheers that night, only a slightly easier silence in the fort. She spent the day like any other, over a table in a stuffy stone room with Varen, tracing supply routes on a map of the western marches. You're thinking of the battles again, he said without looking up. I'm thinking of wagons, she replied. If Dareth keeps raiding between Stonebridge and Low Vaelin, We'll lose more to hunger than to steel." Verin smiled faintly. "Then the war's getting into your bones properly. When you start worrying about wagons instead of glory, you're past the worst of the stories they tell boys at home." She didn't say she'd never had those stories. The autumn rains came. The Vaelin swelled. The days shortened. Dareth's forces tried the fort's resolve twice more, but each time it was half-hearted, the plays of a king still counting his coin and his allies. The first snows fell on the higher ridges by late harvest. The armies dug in. Winter settled like a held breath over the western frontier. Campaign banners came down. Heavier tents went up. At Kesserin, the fort became a town in miniature. Cook fires and mended walls, drills shortened to save strength, patrols pulled back from far-flung fords lest they freeze to death before any enemy found them. The Vaeloran camp across the river diminished. Some units withdrawn, others rotated, their distant fires fewer but still there. War did not stop in winter. It just changed shape. Verin used the dark months as ruthlessly as he used the bright ones. Seraphyne walked the camp with him, cloak pulled tight against the chill. She watched him listen to complaints about boots and rations with the same attention he gave to scout reports. She watched him mark down which companies rotated latrine duty without grumbling, which sergeants kept their men sharp without cruelty, which officers seemed too fond of warmth and wine. "Loyalty is fragile in winter," he said one night, standing by a map lit from below by a lantern's glow. "Men will march for pride in spring. In the cold, they march for food and the promise of seeing home again." "Does Dareth's army freeze too?" she asked. "Unless his mages can conjure stew and boots?" Verin said dryly. "Yes, war is fairer than kings. It makes all of us hungry." Reports from the capital trickled in through the snows. Debates in the assembly about war levies, merchants petitioning for protection, nobles complaining about the costs of supporting garrisons on their lands. Seraphyne read each dispatch as if it were a different dialect of the same language. "They're not reading the same war we are," she said once, setting a letter aside. "To them it's numbers in ledgers and names on lists. Here it's blisters and frostbite and men arguing about whose turn it is to go cut wood." Verin nodded. "You've just described why some generals prefer to stay in the capital." "Do you?" she asked. He gave her a look as if she'd asked if he wanted to lick a latrine post. "No," he said. She believed him. Year 2 sharpened the edges. When the thaw came, both kings moved faster. Dareth's forces were thicker at the Vaelin's eastern bank. Banners clustered more densely. Siege frames starting to rise. Word came of raids farther south. Vaeloran light cavalry slipping across shallower fords near Harrowin. Burning storehouses, cutting roads. Alaric's answer was bolder than the year before. "Not enough to hold Kesserin," Verin told his officers over the map. "We must show Dareth he cannot mass unchallenged anywhere along the river. If he concentrates at Harrowfield, we go to meet him." "He'll want to fight where his cavalry can move," Seraphyne said, pointing at the broad plain marked Harrowfield on the parchment. "Yes," Verin said, "and where ours can." Scouts had reported a Vaeloran host gathering near Harrowfield. Infantry lines, medium cavalry, and more worrying, larger groups of robed figures around tall, rune-strung poles. "Tempest mages," one of the Pyrrhic mage officers said quietly when the reports were read. "Battle mages. Their lightning calls are coordinated through those foci." "An hour?" Verin asked. 6 detachments of Pyrrhic battle mages attached to 2nd Legion, the officer said. "Ward specialists, counter-evocation training. Nothing as theatrical as the Tempest, but they can blunt it." "Good," Verin said. "We march at first light." Seraphyne rode with the command column again, this time farther from Kesserin's familiar walls. The land opened up into rolling fields pocked with the scars of old skirmishes, burned copses, broken fences, a half-collapsed farmhouse that had once been someone's whole world. They met Dareth's army on Harrowfield under a sky that couldn't decide whether to be clear or gray. From the ridge where Verin placed her, Seraphyne could see everything. Alaric's infantry lines, rectangular blocks of men with spears and shields, banners whipping above them. The archers set slightly behind and to the sides, ready to loose over friendly heads. The heavy cavalry, gleaming in plate and bright pennons, war horses stamping, snorting clouds into the chill air. And beyond the no-man's land of trampled grass, Dareth's forces, looser, more ragged at the edges, but dense at the center, with clusters of mage marks where the Tempest mages stood among tall poles, etched with spirals of symbols even she couldn't quite decipher at this distance. "They're fewer than us," one young officer muttered, shading his eyes with a gloved hand. "Count banners, not bodies," Rein said, "and mage foci, and how many supply wagons you see behind that hill." Seraphyne watched as signals passed down the lines, flags, trumpet calls, mounted runners. She watched Rein absorb information like a dry sponge. Wind direction, ground softness, distance to the tree line. "You're not looking at their soldiers," she realized. "Not mainly," he said. "I'm looking at where they can't easily move, which tells me where they'll try to move." "Is this a decisive battle?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. This is both kings showing each other the color of their teeth." The clash, when it came, was almost disappointingly far away. Infantry advanced first, shields up, spears braced. Arrows darkened the air in arcs from both sides, dropping with sick little thuds she could hear even from the ridge. Cavalry didn't charge until the front lines met, and when they did, the impact was more geometry than glory, wedges stabbing into weak points, falling back when they met resistance. Then the mages began. It started near the Vaeloran center. Lightning speared down from a too-clear sky, not random but in measured, repeating forks that struck just in front of Alaric's advancing lines. Men stumbled, shield formations broke to avoid the flashes. Pyrrhic mages responded with shimmering wards, pale, translucent domes that flickered into being over key sections of the line. Lightning struck them and split, the force scattering harmlessly outward, singing hair and cloth but not flesh. Despite the crack and flare of mage work, the battle never tipped into rout. Alaric's heavy cavalry managed one solid charge that drove a wedge into Dareth's left, but the Vaeloran medium horse swung around the flank and harried them back before the infantry could exploit the opening. By dusk, both armies had bloodied each other and stepped away, neither willing to spend more lives on ground that wouldn't stay taken. "We call that a learning loss," Rein said that night over the map. "Who lost?" Seraphyne asked. "Both of us," he said, which is the sort of thing kings pretend isn't possible. By year 3, the songs were shorter, somewhere between spring's first mud and the summer dust. The bright edges of the war dulled. New banners looked strange next to the patched ones. Veterans greeted recruits with tight, measuring eyes. Alaric chose to push that year. "We have held long enough," he said, according to the dispatch read aloud at Kesserin. "Dareth chips at our borders and calls it restraint. We answer by carrying the war to ground of our choosing." That ground was the Rivenford, a branching of the Valen, where a smaller tributary cut north through low, marshy land. Several shallow crossings there provided chances to flank Kesserin's hold on the main bridge. Dareth had begun testing them with small parties the previous year. Now he built more permanent camps there. Rein was ordered to dislodge him. Seraphyne rode with him again, more maps in her case, more questions in her mouth. "How do we attack across a river that doesn't stay in one place?" she asked, peering at the inked lines showing the ford and surrounding marsh. "Carefully," Rein said, "and with lighter armor than my bones would prefer. Heavy cavalry will bog down. We'll need infantry to move like water and cavalry to think like knives, not hammers." "And mages?" she asked. "Wards for the crossings," he said. "Smoke if we can't break their lines cleanly. No grand firestorms. Too many reeds. Wind will betray us." He didn't have to say the rest. No use of her. At the Rivenford, war looked different. The Vaelen split around a low island tufted with reeds and scrub. The main channel stayed swift and deep. The secondary branch sprawled over flatter land, forming a series of knee-to-thigh-deep fords depending on the season. Now, with spring floods still receding, the water was treacherous, opaque, swirling, hiding uneven ground beneath the surface. Vaeloran forces had dug in on the far bank and the island both. Earthworks, sharpened stakes, small palisades. Their archers had good lines of sight. Their medium cavalry hovered where the ground was firmest, ready to pounce on any faltering crossing. Dareth's Tempest mages were there too. Their pale mass turned toward the water, their focus poles bristling like a malignant grove. From a wooded rise overlooking the ford, Seraphyne watched Alaric's infantry attempt the first crossing. Shields up, they waded into the water, boots sliding, formations shivering with each step. Arrows rained down from the far bank, some hitting shields, some slipping between them. A few men vanished abruptly into deeper pockets and did not resurface. Pyrrhic mages raised wards over the densest clusters, but their attention couldn't cover everything. They had to choose. Too many moving parts, Rein muttered, visor raised as he peered through the trees. Too little solid ground. Then why attack? Seraphyne asked. Because if we don't, Dareth will, he said, and he's had more time to measure the mud. The first wave made it halfway before a coordinated burst of lightning turned the water itself into a weapon. Bolts lanced down in quick succession along a line. Men convulsed, dropped, dragged others with them. The formations broke. Signal horns sounded the retreat. They tried again elsewhere along the branch. And again. Each time the ground itself seemed to betray them. Men slipping, getting turned around in the reeds, losing cohesion under hail from archers who had no need to move. Medium Vaeloran cavalry darted forward to harry any who made it to the far bank, then retreated before Alaric's own light horse could catch them. By dusk, the field reeked of churned mud, blood, and ozone. A scattering of pale masks watched them from across the water. That night in the command tent, the map of the Rivenford looked like a wound. Officer reports piled up, casualties, lost equipment, men unaccounted for in the marsh. Some suggested a night raid across a narrower ford. Others urged pulling back and fortifying their own side. Seraphyne listened, silent. When the tent emptied at last, she spoke. If you had refused the order, she said to Rein, if you had told the king this ground was too costly, he would have sent another commander, Rein said, one who believed the river cared about royal intent. He rubbed a hand over his face, lines deeper there than they'd been 3 years ago. This wasn't a foolish order, he added. We needed to know if we could break him here. Now we know. And the men who drowned, she asked? They bought that knowledge with their lives, he said. My task is to make sure the king doesn't waste the purchase. The winter after Rivenford was the hardest yet. Supply caravans struggled through overused roads. Some never arrived. Rumors of shortages in the capital reached the camp. Bread lines, price spikes, occasional riots quelled quickly and efficiently. Official dispatches called Rivenford a tactical assessment with partial objectives achieved. Letters from soldiers to their families, intercepted and lightly censored by stewards, called it a bad idea in a bad river with good men in it. Seraphyne read both. The gap between them lodged somewhere in her chest and never quite left. By the end of the third winter, the war's first shape was clear. Alaric had held his river and his forts. Dareth had bled him at fords and in fields, but gained no cities. Both sides had learned the measure of the other's mages, cavalry, and fortitude. It looked on the maps almost like nothing had happened. On the ground, everything had. She sat alone at a crate that doubled as a table. A map of the western marches spread in front of her, pins marking battles she hadn't fought in, but had watched from high places. There were more pins than she'd expected when she started counting. Still awake? Baron's voice came from just outside. He ducked into the tent a moment later, bringing a wave of cold air and the smell of wood smoke with him. Seraphyne didn't bother to stand. Maps don't need sleep, she said. Cartographers do, he replied. Even the dangerous ones. Baron's gaze dropped to the map. You see it now, he said softly. Yes, she replied. The shape of it, he clarified. The way each spring and winter stacks on the last. Where he's stronger. Where we are. Where the ground lies, waiting for blood it hasn't had yet. Yes, she said again. He was quiet a moment. Next year, he said at last, you won't be watching from the ridgeline. Her pulse jumped. Where then? She asked. In the line behind me, Rein said. Close enough to smell it. Close enough to understand which decisions feel different when they're measured in heartbeats instead of inch marks on parchment. Am I to be used? She asked. Not at first, he said. You'll still observe, but not from safety. And if the king decides the time has come to let the other side see what you are, he let that hang. Seraphyne looked at the map, the rivers, the plains, the forts, the small inked circles that meant villages that would keep living or not depending on lines drawn in distant rooms. For 3 years, I've watched men die over stolen wagons, she said quietly, over bridges and fords, and whether one man thinks himself insulted by another. I've watched mages tear lightning out of clear skies because their kings are afraid of running out of grain and stories. And? Baron asked. And I understand it now, she said. That's the worst part. He nodded once. Good, he said. She frowned. Good? You can't change something you don't understand, Baron said. Kings included. Then next year, she said, I'll see it up close. Yes, Baron said. Next year, you ride with me to the front. Outside, winter pressed against the tent walls. Beyond that, the river slept under its thin skin of ice, dreaming of thaw. 7 years of war had been promised. 3 had passed in maps and mud, in the quiet grinding down of illusions. The 4th would not be so silent. Chapter 5. The War of Two Kingdoms, Part 2. Year 4. The First Fire. Spring of Year 4 broke the river ice into gray slabs that clattered downstream like bones. When the snows receded, the war woke again, groaning, stretching, demanding men and horses and grain as if it had never slept. This year, Seraphyne did not watch from ridges. She rode beside Captain Rein as part of the forward observation parties, small clusters of officers, runners, and mage officers who moved just behind the engaged infantry to relay orders and assess the battle's shape in real time. It was the closest she had ever been to fighting without stepping into it. She learned quickly that the front did not sound like stories. It was not trumpets and clashing swords. It was shouted distances, wet coughing, arrows thudding like rotten fruit, and the ugly cracking of shields under pressure. At Hereford, the spring offensive opened with Alaric attempting to push Dareth from the low bluffs overlooking the river bend. Infantry pressed forward through muck and half-rotted brush. Archers in the tree lines traded volleys that punched holes in foliage. Medium cavalry tried and failed to find footing in the slick ground. The Tempest mages there again, on the ridge, masked, tall focus poles humming with power. Lightning split the air in precise, soldier-killing lines that forced Alaric's troops to spread out, ruining the spear walls that heavy infantry relied on. Pyrrhic mages responded with layered wards, pale domes rippling under each strike, lowering, rising, shivering like soap bubbles. It wasn't enough to gain ground, but it was enough to prevent the battle from collapsing into rout. Seraphyne stood beneath a battered pine, next to crates serving as makeshift tables. Rein and 2 generals bent over maps weighed with stones, while runners darted in and out, shouting breathless updates. Left flank holding, cavalry pinned, archers requesting counterfire. Tempest mages repositioning 3 poles northeast. Ward integrity low. Pyrrhic says 5 minutes, maybe? The air buzzed with tension and ozone. Smoke drifted from burning brush. Infantry surged up the slope again, then fell back again, like waves that couldn't remember if they were supposed to rise or retreat. Seraphyne absorbed it all, the timing, the spacing, the panic. The moments where officer decisions changed the fate of 50 men with 3 words and a gesture. Hours into the struggle, Seraphyne frowned. Something in the air shifted. Not sight, not sound. A scent. Most people never noticed battle scent beyond blood and fire, but she smelled. Sharp iron, wet leather, human fear, the powdery residue of arcane reagents, and then something else. Ozone without storm, burnt mint, a mage. She didn't turn her head, didn't tense. She simply let her nostrils flare, just once, as Rein argued with General Halden over whether to reinforce the center or collapse it inward. Behind them, space folded. To the untrained eye, it looked like a ripple in heat haze. To her, it smelled like imminent violence. A Tempest battle mage blinked into existence half a stride behind her, blade already half drawn, lightning crackling around his wrist. He hadn't targeted her. He was aiming for Varen or the generals, but Seraphyne was between them and opportunity. Nobody saw. She did not look. She simply raised her left hand, palm outward. A burst of flame, white-orange and silent, detonated from her skin and consumed the mage whole. There was no scream, no drama. One heartbeat he existed, mask gleaming, eyes wide, and the next moment he collapsed into ash, drifting down in a black-gray sheet. The smell of scorched cloth and cooked reagents puffed into the air. Silence rippled outward. Runners froze. One of the generals dropped his quill. Varen spun with his hand on his sword, eyes wide. There was nothing left of the enemy but a black smear and a few flakes settling like snow. Varen stared at the ashes, then at her. "How did you know he was there?" he asked, voice low, somewhere between accusation and awe. Seraphyne finally lowered her arm. "I smelled him," she said. The generals shared a look like men who had just glimpsed a wolf sitting calmly in their doorway. The battle at Hereford ended inconclusively. Alaric's forces held ground, but gained nothing decisive. The Tempest mages withdrew once their assassination attempt failed, leaving only scorched earth and runner reports whispering that the enemy was getting bold. That night, Varen filed a private report to King Alaric, delivered by hand, stamped with no seal, and recorded in no ledger. The next morning, Pyrrhic mage officers avoided Seraphine's eyes, not out of scandal, out of caution, perhaps out of fear. Year 5 was the most confusing year of the war, not because of maps or battles, but because soldiers began telling stories, and soldiers' stories travel faster than scouts. The Tempest mage infiltration attempt became camp rumor within weeks. A mage turned to Ash. No incantations, no gestures, no wards, just flame and silence. Most stories were wrong. She incinerated a dozen men. She shouted a Pyrrhic word of power. She was possessed. Only one part stayed consistent. No funeral. The Pyrrhic Order tried to investigate, but they lacked an outcome. There was no corpse and no precedent. Officially, nothing happened. Unofficially, everything changed. When Seraphyne walked the winter camps that year, soldiers watched her from the corners of their eyes. Not hostile, not reverent, just wary, the way men watch a storm cloud deciding where to strike. The Pyrrhic Order was worse. She began to notice. Clerks closing books when she approached, apprentices turning away, mage officers cutting conversations dead. Not overt hatred, just the uneasy recognition that she did not fit their world. It didn't bother her. She had seen enough war to know that people fear what isn't categorized. What bothered her was the way Dareth's Tempest mage changed tactics. Before, they struck like lightning artillery, from range, coordinated, theatrical. By mid-year 5, they began operating in small squads, probing Alaric's lines at night, testing wards, hunting officers, searching for cracks in morale. 3 times that year, squads were caught attempting infiltration. Twice by scouts, once by Seraphyne. That time, she didn't burn them. She simply watched from the shadows as they crept through brush, masks pale as moonlight, moving like snakes. She tracked them by scent alone, sweat souring in armor, faint birch oil used to mask magical residue, the sharp tang of fear when they realized they were lost. When they were captured, one Tempest mage, a young one, voice trembling, was overheard asking, "Is the fire scent here? Did she smell us?" Seraphyne said nothing. Varen offered no explanation. Some truths are stronger as rumors. Battles that year were largely stalemates. Cavalry skirmishes at Farron Field, failed river crossings near Stonebridge, small siege at Old Barrowfort, where defenders starved for 3 weeks before withdrawal. Nothing decided the war. Everything bled it dry. By winter, the only clear victory was that Alaric's legions had held more ground than they lost. Not glorious, but in long wars, survival is a kind of triumph. The winter of year 5 was quieter, but in a dangerous way. Supplies were better managed. Officers stopped wondering if the war would end soon. They asked how it would end, which king would break, which army would run, which commander would finally make a mistake. Seraphyne read those questions in every dispatch and realized what Varen meant years ago when he said, Battles don't decide wars. Years do. She had watched 4. She had survived the 5th. The 6th would be different. She could smell the shift coming. Year 6, 20 masks and fire. Year 6 began with a summons. Seraphyne was in the warding yard outside Kesserin, watching Pyrrhic apprentices practice shield domes in the snow, when a rider dismounted and handed her a sealed order. The seal was Alaric's. Inside were 14 words. Report to High Command. You will assume command of 20 battle mages. No explanation, no pleasantries, no doctrine references, just authority. Rein read the order once, folded it, and said nothing for a long time. When he did speak, it was not reassurance. Battle mages are loyal to doctrine, he said, not to novelty. They will not like this. I don't need them to like it, she said. You do, Rein replied. Just not yet. Respect follows results. Results follow command. Command follows restraint. She understood, not because she agreed, but because she had watched him command for 6 years. High command looked different in wartime. Maps covered every flat surface. Officers slept in armor. Couriers moved between tents like blood in veins. The Pyrrhic Order had a whole wing to itself. Scribes, spellwrights, wounded artificers, repairing gauntlets and ward rods. 20 battle mages stood in formation when she arrived. Their uniforms were regulation, charcoal cloaks, black mage-weave tunics, reinforced spell gauntlets, steel masks identical to those Alaric's corps favored. They looked like a funeral procession waiting for a corpse. She walked the line. Their eyes followed through the mask slits. She could smell tension, sweat, old lightning residue, hot metal from freshly reworked gauntlets, and, for a few, fear. At the end of the line stood a mage officer, pale, hawk-faced, hair tied back with ritual precision. Commander Seraphyne, he said, voice brittle. I am Mage Officer Tholen. I am to ensure your compliance with Pyrrhic doctrine and prevent doctrinal contamination of the Corps. Seraphyne regarded him with the same expression she used on maps. Do you believe I require containment? She asked. Yes, he said without hesitation. Good, she replied. Then you will know where not to stand. It was not a threat. It was logistics. The 20 mages did not kneel. They did not salute. They did not welcome her. That was fine. Armies don't need warmth to function. They need victories. Their first deployment came within 10 days. Siege of Orenford, where Dareth's forces held a fortified town controlling the highway south. Alaric needed it open before winter, or the southern levies would starve before reaching the front. Seraphine's mage unit was attached to 3rd Legion. General Halden, one of the men who had been at Hereford and witnessed the Ash, pulled Rein aside on the morning of the assault. She's not ready for this, he hissed. Rein didn't look up from the map. No one is, he said, but she's necessary. At the siege line, infantry sheltered behind pavises as arrows rained from the walls. Engineers pushed siege ramps under fire. Archers tried to suppress defenders but were outnumbered. The problem was simple. Orenford's walls were too high. The solution was not. Traditional Pyrrhic doctrine would have used wards to protect ramps, slow attrition until infantry breached. Time was the enemy. Winter was weeks away. Seraphyne walked the line of her 20 mages, breathing the air, smoke, fear, charred wood, heated iron. She turned to Tholen. Do they know declension? She asked. Of course, he snapped. All Pyrrhic battle mages. I'm not asking about ward declension, she cut in. I'm asking about heat collapse. Tholen blinked. That is not doctrine. It is now, she said. She raised her arm. Her mages did not know what she intended. They obeyed anyway. 20 gauntlet-mounted foci flared as she directed them. No sweeping gestures, no grand incantations, just terse commands. Left ramp, kill the shields. Right ramp, push heat. Center, collapse. They didn't understand until the second volley. Heat didn't burn the walls. It burned the defenders' shields, superheating metal rims until men dropped them screaming. It heated the air under the battlements, choking archers out of their positions. It forced Tempest mages to raise ward shells to protect their own. Then Seraphyne raised her palm. Fire didn't roar. It breathed in a tight, controlled column that struck the gate's hinges, not the gate itself. Iron screamed. The gate didn't explode. It buckled. Infantry surged. Within the hour, Orenford's walls were taken. The third casualty report listed infantry losses, archer losses, and mage losses. Under Battle Mage Unit, Commander Seraphyne, the entry read, 0 casualties, objectives achieved, no cheers, no applause, just the weight of a wall that had never expected to fall so fast. Orenford fell before the army had finished counting its dead. Its gates still smoldered. The hinges lay twisted like pulled teeth. Engineers were only beginning to argue over repairs when the first rider came in hard from the south, horse-lathered white despite the cold. Rein took the report first. He read it once, then again. "They still think Orenford holds," he said quietly. The officers gathered around the table leaned closer. No one spoke. The fort was smaller. No walls meant to endure a true siege. No deep granaries. A relay keep. A place meant to watch roads and pass messages, not stand alone. It sat on a low rise near the river bend, its signal tower visible for leagues. And it was awake. Messengers still rode from it toward Orenford. Smoke still rose from its cook fires. Patrols still followed routine paths. It was functioning. Seraphyne studied the map without touching it. "How long until they realize?" she asked. 2 days, one officer guessed. 3 at most. She nodded once. "We leave tonight." There were protests. Quiet ones, careful ones. Supply officers, quartermasters, men who had learned to fear moving too fast. Rein silenced them with a look. "She's right," he said. "If we wait, they reinforce. If we move, they're blind." Seraphyne turned to him. "It's not an attack," she said. "It's a correction." They marched without banners. No horns, no campfires after dusk. Infantry carried shields wrapped in cloth to mute sound. Cavalry rode wide, hooves dampened with river mud. The mages were ordered not to cast unless commanded. No wards, no warming spells, no light. It was the first time many of them had marched like ghosts. They reached the ridge before dawn. Below them, the fort slept uneasily. Lanterns burned low along the palisade. A watchman leaned too hard on his spear. Somewhere inside, a bell clanged once, then stopped, routine, not alarm. Seraphyne crouched beside Rein, cloak pulled tight against the wind. "No siege," she said. "No breach." She pointed with 2 fingers. "Take the tower, quietly. I want the gates intact." A pause. "And if they resist?" Her eyes flicked toward the fort, measuring angles, distances, habits. "They won't." The first spell was barely a spell at all, a thin shimmer, heat bent just enough to soften iron, not melt it. The hinges of the signal tower's door sagged. The lock failed without noise. Infantry slipped inside like water finding a crack. The watchman never cried out. When the tower went dark, no one noticed. That was the point. Only when the gate guards realized their runners weren't returning did the fort stir. Shouts followed. Confusion. A half-formed line of men tried to assemble near the inner yard. Seraphyne raised her hand once. "Now!" 20 gauntlets flared. Not fire, not lightning, but pressure. Air compressed into concussive bursts that slammed shields backward and knocked men off their feet without killing them. Panic spread faster than flame. Someone rang the bell. Someone else tried to. The bell tower was already occupied. Within minutes, the gates were opened from the inside. No charge followed. Infantry advanced at a walk. The defenders saw the banners then, Alaric's colors rising slow and inevitable through the fog, and their will broke like wet wood. The fort surrendered before the sun cleared the ridge. By midday, the message had spread, not by heralds, not by proclamation, by rumor. 2 forts in 8 days. Same mages, same commander, different methods. The soldiers talked as they always did, over bread, over dice, over the small fires allowed now that the march was done. They spoke of how the walls hadn't burned, of how the gate hadn't exploded, of how the woman in leather armor had watched the surrender as if it were an expected conclusion. They stopped lowering their voices when she passed. They didn't cheer. They watched. From across the river, Dareth's scouts finally understood what had happened. They sent reports, urgent, messy things filled with speculation and fear. Not what had fallen, but how. That night, Vaelor stood alone over the map. Seraphyne joined him without announcement. "They'll adapt," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "They'll bring more mages." "Yes, different ones." Her mouth curved. Not a smile. "I know." He studied her a moment longer. "You didn't need to take it," he said. "Not so soon." She met his gaze. "They needed to lose it," she replied. After a pause, she added quieter, "Momentum is a kind of fire. If you don't feed it, it turns on you." Vaelor inclined his head. He would write to the king that night. No seal, no record. He would not try to explain everything, only this. She no longer fights battles. She shapes them. By autumn of year 6, resentment hadn't vanished. It had simply changed shape. Some officers still refused to speak to her directly. Some Pyrrhic Order scribes recorded her results with tight lips. Some battle mages followed orders with mechanical precision, refusing to meet her eyes even after victories. But no one questioned her place on the battlefield anymore, because results are louder than comfort, and fire, in the right hands, does not need to shout. By the 7th year of the War of Two Kings, the banner of Alaric flew over half of Valar's heartland. Grain stores flew his seal. River crossings flew his seal. Border keeps flew his seal. Only the capital, Valacar, remained. Its walls were old stone, blackened by time and war. Its people had not seen peace in a generation. King Dareth had retreated behind its gates like a man barricading himself behind his own legacy. Alaric's armies encircled large swaths of the countryside, occupying keep after keep. Seraphyne, now a commander in her own right, was dispatched on a solo mission, a calculated strike deep behind enemy lines to break their last inland supply. She succeeded, alone as always. When she returned to the main encampment outside the forest of Nerys, the men did not meet her eyes. Officers avoided her. Even the Pyrrhic Order kept their distance. Seraphyne felt the absence before she heard the words. Captain Varen's tent was gone, stripped, folded, packed. His maps had been removed, his command staff reassigned. Only a single spear remained, planted in the earth where his chair once sat. She grabbed a passing runner. "Report," she said. The boy swallowed. "Captain Varen is dead, Commander." The world did not go silent. It went hot. Not the flames that killed men, the flames that lived in marrow, the kind that made breath feel like smoke. "How?" she asked. "Tempest Mage raid, Commander. On the southern bank. He held the line, bought time for withdrawal." That was the official version. She knew how much truth lived in official versions. For a moment she did not speak, did not move, did not breathe. Something inside her, something that had been quiet for years, stood up. She left the camp without a word. No orders, no escort, no permission. No one stopped her. Some saw her pass through the pickets at dusk, walking north. Some saw her silhouette crest the ridge at dawn. One archer swore the air warped around her footsteps. Heat mirages shimmering off grass that should not have burned. None followed. Valacar. The capital rose from the plain like a weathered fist. Tall curtain walls, copper spires, a cracked bell tower overlooking the city proper. The city watch kept a half-starved vigilance, hoping Alaric's army would spend another week negotiating before the final assault. They did not expect a single figure. A watchman on the eastern wall was the first to see her, small at a distance, black hair streaked red by the morning light, walking with a soldier's stride and a predator's stillness. He blinked. Then he reached for the bell rope. Gong. The alarm bell roared across rooftops. Gong. Windows flew open. Dogs barked. Horses shrieked. Children cried. Gong. The wall walk filled with spears, crossbows, pikes, captains shouting contradictory orders. Standard-bearers climbed the parapets. Militia were roused from sleep and shoved into lines. Outside the gate, on the killing field, ranks assembled in a panicked tide. Infantry first, archers second, and finally the Tempest Mages of Vaelor, taking the forward position with polished arrogance. Seraphyne kept walking. She could hear the bells as if they were in her skull. That won't save you, she thought. The city gates opened just enough to disgorge troops. Nearly 300 infantry and a full cadre of battle mages, 30 in number, focus poles glinting in the sun. Enough force to kill a scouting party, not enough to stop a war. They formed up, shields locked, poles raised, cloaks snapping in the wind. Seraphyne stopped 10 feet from their line. The distance was deliberate, close enough to speak, far enough to kill. One mage broke forward, armor lacquered, red and black, a commander by bearing if not by age. His mask was carved steel, his gauntlets crackling with prepared spellwork. He called out across the gap, "Have you come to surrender, witch?" Seraphyne tilted her head slightly and slowly, her eyes kindled red, embers caught in oil. "No," she said, "but I'll accept yours." Everyone in earshot heard it. The ranks behind him erupted in laughter, soldiers, mages, even a few captains. Laughter rolled like a wave off stone. Seraphyne didn't smile. She spoke louder. "Leave the field, go in peace, or stay and die." More laughter. One archer doubled over, wiping tears from his eyes. Only the mage commander stopped laughing. Rage twisted through his aura like stormlight. He raised his right gauntlet, igniting a spell with more theatrics than wisdom. "The only one dying here is you," he spat. He hurled a fireball the size of a shield straight at her, center mass. It crackled through the air, scorching grass, throwing heat waves in its wake. It hit her dead on. The soldiers roared approval, cheering, whistling, pounding shields. Then the cheering died. The fire did not explode. It collapsed inward, absorbed into her chest like a breath. Steam curled from her skin. Her hair lifted in an unseen wind. Her eyes burned white at the edges. She inhaled. "Thank you," Seraphyne said. She raised her hand. "Now I'll return the favor." The fireball she unleashed was not a projectile. It was a sentence. A roaring sphere the size of a siege engine tore across the 10-foot gap and detonated against the front line. Not with flame, but with pressure, heat, and force compressed so violently that the first three ranks never even screamed. They simply ceased. Armor melted into flesh. Poles splintered. Men behind them staggered, blinded, screaming, stumbling over the ash of their comrades. Inside the gatehouse, King Seraphyne Vaelor watched from behind an arrow slit. He saw the volley. He saw the annihilation. He saw the gap where 30 men had stood. His face went white. "Fetch my horse," he whispered. "Your Majesty, the army, fetch my horse!" He fled through the postern gate with 6 guards and a half-slung saddle, abandoning his capital before the second bell finished ringing. On the field, the surviving mages broke first. Infantry broke second. They ran for the gate, trampling each other, pleading to be let inside, shouting, "Open! Open! Gods, open the gate!" The gate did open, for one heartbeat. Seraphyne raised her hand again. The hinges glowed white. The beam snapped. The gate fell forward with a groan, crushing 2 men beneath it and spilling 36 more into the dirt. Seraphyne stepped over the bodies, walked through the gate, and entered Valakar. By sunset, Alaric's banners would fly over the city, but every man on the plain would remember something else entirely. Not the victory, not the surrender, not the fallen capital. They would remember the way one woman ended a war by walking toward it. Valakar did not burn. It surrendered. By midday, Alaric's legions marched through the shattered gate in organized columns. Shields locked, spears angled, riders flanking the streets, banners streaming in the wind. The people watched from windows and alley mouths, silent, hollow-eyed, too tired for hatred. King Seraphyne Vaelor had fled east with a handful of loyalists, abandoning crown, court, and city. There would be no negotiated peace with him, only a treaty with his absence. Alaric declared the war ended at sunset. For the first time in 7 years, no watchman struck the alarm bell. Surrender protocol. The surrender terms were surprisingly merciful. Vaelor's soldiers who laid down arms were granted amnesty. Officers were registered, disarmed, and returned to their estates under oath. Tempest Mage survivors were taken prisoner for eventual trial. Civilians were protected under the crown's peace. Alaric understood that cruelty after victory breeds rebellion. His mercy was not kindness, it was strategy. But there were limits. Tempest mages were lined up in the palace courtyard, 47 men and women, masks removed, hands bound with anti-channeling cords. Pirate clerks moved down the line, cataloging names, ranks, units, battles served. Most refused to speak. One spat at a clerk's feet and hissed, "Fire does not conquer us, fire sells us." He was beaten for that, but even through broken teeth he smiled, because he knew the court feared what had happened at the gate. They feared her. The prisoner exchange debate. Alaric's generals gathered in the throne room to debate terms with Vaelor's remaining lords. The arguments went in circles. Execute the Tempest. They are war criminals. Spare them. Their knowledge has value. Ransom the nobility. Exile them. Fold the border counties into the crown. Alaric let them argue until voices cracked and maps curled from candle heat. Only once did he speak. "The war is over. We are not here to make another." It killed the room's momentum instantly. Even in victory, Alaric was playing years ahead. Where was Seraphyne? Not in the palace, not with the generals, not with the Pyrrhic order. She was in the old cemetery behind the northern wall, kneeling beside a spear planted in the frost-hardened earth. The same kind of spear that had stood outside Varen's empty tent. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just sat with the anger cooling in her blood, trying to understand the shape of a world without the one person who had never flinched at her fire. It was there that a messenger found her. "The king requests your presence," he said. She didn't answer. She simply stood and walked. The cost of loyalty. Kesserin had never been meant to last. It was a forward base, stone hastily raised, trenches dug with the expectation they would soon be abandoned. Its walls were practical, its halls narrow, its foundations shallow. It existed only because the war demanded it, and because Seraphyne Vaelor had stood there. Seraphyne arrived at Kesserin. The air still smelled of sulfur and scorched earth when the king summoned her beneath the command pavilion. The battle had ended, but fires smoldered in the distance. The ground itself radiated heat, as though the land had not yet decided whether it would cool or burn again. Seraphyne entered without escort. She never needed one. The throne room was quieter now that the generals had gone. Only guards remained, stationed like statues along the walls, and a single scribe seated far back. Eyes lowered, quill poised but unmoving. The echoes of war councils still clung to the stone, but the arguments had been dismissed. King Alaric stood at the head of the table. It was still covered with battle maps. Seraphyne Vaelor entered without ceremony. Ash still clung to her armor, darkening the scorched metal. Her cloak was torn, her boots tracked soot across polished stone. She looked as though she had walked straight from the battlefield into the heart of the kingdom and had not bothered to clean herself for the occasion. Alaric watched her the way a man watched the weather, measuring, calculating, aware that what came next could not be stopped. "Commander," he said. "Majesty," she replied. They stood facing one another, the war compressed into a single room. "You disobeyed orders," Alaric said calmly. "You abandoned your command. You engaged the enemy alone. You risked a diplomatic catastrophe." Seraphyne tilted her head slightly. "I ended your war." Alaric's jaw tightened, too controlled to be anger, too deliberate to be approval. "Yes," he said, "you did." Silence settled between them, heavy and deliberate. "You were not sent to take Valakar," he continued. "You were sent to cripple supply lines. Annihilating an army and terrifying a capital into surrender was not the assignment." Seraphyne did not apologize. She never had. "Varen died," she said. The name cut deeper than accusation. Alaric's eyes narrowed, not at the words, but at the meaning behind them. "A soldier's death," he said carefully, holding the line. "He held the line for you," she replied. "I broke the line for him." For the first time, the guards shifted. Alaric stepped towards her, closing the distance until only a few paces separated them. He chose that death, Alaric said, just as you chose what followed. That is war. It takes what it pleases. Seraphyne met his gaze. Not the crown, not the armor, but the man beneath. And what does war please now, she asked. Alaric exhaled slowly. Peace, he said. A tedious, brittle, necessary peace. He studied her, truly studied her, for a long moment. Your fire has served the crown well, he said, but peace does not require fire. Peace requires structure, restraint, patience. There it was, the thing she had expected, the thing she had feared, the thing she could not accept. You would put me back in chains, she said quietly. No, Alaric replied. I would put you in rooms, in councils, in courts. She laughed once, short and sharp. You would bury me in silk and call it mercy. You are too dangerous to leave uncontained, he said, voice low, and too valuable to discard. Seraphyne took a step back, not in fear but realization. The pact, she said slowly. You swore this kingdom would know peace. It will, Alaric said. He smiled, a thin, crooked smile, just not with you in it. The blade struck before instinct could answer. Cold iron punched between her ribs, driving the air from her lungs in a sharp, broken gasp. She staggered back as the magic detonated inside her, not outward, but inward, collapsing wards, unraveling protections she had never imagined would be turned against her. What? Her voice failed. What have you done? Alaric's face was pale now. His hands shook as he released the hilt. What I had to. Seraphyne gasped, staggering back. Alaric's hands shook, not with guilt, but with terror. The floor ignited. Sigils flared beneath her feet. Her sigils, drawn from designs she had perfected, now inverted and bound into a ritual circle she had never meant to see completed. Her blood spilled onto the runes. The magic answered. The air thickened. Shadows coiled. The stone groaned as something deep below began to stir. You needed me, she whispered, horror blooming into clarity. You needed my power, my sacrifice. The kingdom demanded it, Alaric said, voice breaking. A bitter laugh tore from her chest. Then let the kingdom remember your name. The ground answered. Not immediately, not explosively. First came a tremor, a subtle shudder beneath their feet, like a beast shifting in its sleep. Then another, stronger. The map table rattled. Lanterns swung. Dust fell from the pavilion roof in thin, nervous streams. Seraphyne looked down. The earth beneath her boots was glowing. Not fire. Sigils. They burned through the packed dirt and stone, ancient symbols flaring to life in widening rings. She stumbled, clutching at the dagger's hilt as her blood spilled freely onto the runes. Her blood. The sigils drank it. Realization struck harder than the blade. The ground split. A violent crack tore through the base as the earth burst open beneath her feet. Lava light flared from the depths, heat slamming into the pavilion like a living thing. The air screamed as pressure shifted violently. Get back, one of the guards shouted. Alaric staggered away as the ground heaved again, this time not a tremor, but a quake. Stone foundations collapsed inward. Tents folded and vanished into widening fissures. Men screamed as the earth swallowed them whole. Seraphyne fell, not stumbling, taken. The ground gave way beneath her, and she plunged into the roaring heart of the rupture, dragged downward by the ritual she herself had unknowingly perfected. Fire surged upward in her wake, blackened flame laced with shadow and ash. She screamed once. Then the sound changed. It deepened, layered. Something else screamed with her. Alaric and his guards barely escaped as the pavilion collapsed behind them, consumed by fire and falling stone. They fled as Kesserin broke apart, the forward base becoming a crater of molten rock and rolling ash. Behind them, the earth became a volcano, not natural. Awakened. From the heart of the inferno, a pillar of black fire erupted skyward, punching through smoke and cloud alike. The ground groaned, then went eerily still.
Hello, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Jonathan,
Join us next week for a new story
one that begins in sunny California,
and ends in the English countryside.
at a house that should have stayed empty.
From the Ember Ink Studios.
The Ashbourne Manor Murders.